Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week with an album review where we go through an entire album track by track, exploring each song in isolation and their part of the larger whole. Today we're going to be looking at the group Current 93, a group that I've only heard once before, which was the track Moldoror is Dead, which came off of their first studio album, and that was industrial noise. This one, however, as described to me, is neo-folk and is the project of English musician David Tibet. I'm told that this album is spiritual and that it is dense and long. I'm not sure about the long part. I mean, it is an hour and 20 minutes. I guess 80 minutes is a bit on the longer side. We have 17 tracks here, one of which is 16 minutes long. None of the rest get into double digits, so that one's going to be interesting to dive into. And I'm expecting negativity. Despite being told this is a spiritual album, we have tracks like a sadness song, a song for Douglas after he's dead, a silence song, a lament for Suzanne, Rosy Star Tears from Heaven, and a sadness song, which I guess is going to be different than a sadness song. I really don't know what to expect other than that this is folk related. So let's dive into this. We kick off with a 44-second intro, a beginning, and then we'll dive into the descent of Long Satan and Babylon. Let's go.
Down to the forest to gather fine flowers, but the forest can yield me no roses. But the forest can yield me no roses.
Long Satan and Babylon are walking. They're talking of fire and of ice, of the silence that stalks in the forest. Cries spun out of the worlds, Christ spun out of the world. Long Satan and Babylon are moving through a world ripped away from its center. They shear through the rushes, they follow the night.
I like that triangle. Yeah. Something we don't get too often on this channel. Is that an oboe? I think so.
They only hear the silence. They do not hear the pain. but Christ sees everything. The little children are falling, will topple till the end of the world.
I'm not so sure about the oboe thing anymore.
Long Satan and Babylon keep running through a universe empty of sound. Though the world makes dark shadows, you must look in your heart in the dark. You must look in your heart.
Oh, that goes right in. I kind of want to run it into the next track because I don't have a lot to say, but I want to get my thoughts out on these two before we kick the next one off, just in case things get crazy. I am told this is a dense album, but so far they haven't really presented that. Both of these tracks are primarily acoustic guitar driven, lots of arpeggiation, having a repeating melody with shifting pitches that is going to match the chord progression. So like with a beginning, arpeggiating, rising and falling patterns. With track 2, we have a low note that kind of gives us a grounding, a rooting on beat 1. It goes up and it kind of hovers around here for a little bit, drops back down, rises up, hovers around here. What those notes specifically are, the low one and the 2 or 3 that make up the movement at the top, they're different. As the chord changes, these notes change to match the chordal information as well. But the pattern, the blueprint of the melody doesn't shift. And this is present on both of these tracks. There isn't really a sense of, a beginning is just an A section, but I think that's true for Long Satan as well. I didn't really get a verse chorus idea here. I just got verse, 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 which is very folk of it. It's there to tell a story and doesn't necessarily need a hook like modern music would. But there is phrasing to it. We have just the guitar, then we have the guitar with the triangle, then we have the guitar with the woodwind, and it feels like an oboe to me, but there's something about the timbre that was not right. It could be a production thing, it could be a recording thing, it could be the mic that they use to record it. All sorts of things could be introducing some coloring that I'm just not expecting from the instrument, but was actually an oboe in this case. But yeah, anyways, coming back to this, we have these phrases, the main idea, plus this, plus that, and we continue to add layers, but it is still just, as far as I can hear, an A section all the way through. Maybe there is a chorus based off of lyrics. Maybe we do have a repeated phrase that pops up every now and then, but musically, it just feels like one consistent idea all the way through. I do like how this sounds. I'm a fan of folk music in small doses. It's not that I dislike it, it just rarely can hold my attention for long periods of time. And I'm hoping that the album does become a bit more dense and introduce more ideas, but also being folk, track 2 is exactly what I was expecting. Whether we're looking at Americana folk or pagan folk, this is kind of it. Minimalistic, acoustic, and repetitive. The purpose is there to evoke an emotion and to tell a story through, not necessarily to build out a narrative through the music itself. We're not looking at linear stories. We're not looking at instruments playing melodic lines too often. This is pretty traditional folk music right here, and it's what I'm expecting for a majority of this album, at least based off of the idea that it is folk adjacent. Now, what is the emotionality of this? And this is actually where I got a smile on my face towards the end of track 2, because there was 4 or 5 chords back to back, where originally we were holding one out for a while, holding one out for a while. At the end of this phrase, though, we seem to move through one every, well, group of three, because it's the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So every one, give or take about every second or so, we're changing a chord. And we move through this feeling of tension and release, even relief at times, as like, not necessarily the musical tension and release, but like anxiety, release of that, for having a moment of reprieve. There's excitement, but there's also fun adventure, a palatable tension in there, if you will. A little bit of grief, maybe sorrow, and joy, all mixed into one passage. I thought that was interesting. It wasn't a traditional movement of chords. It was specifically chosen to express a series of emotions that did happen to move through a general rising and falling of intensity. So we did have a feeling of resolution by the end of it, but based off of the chords that we were holding out previously to get to this moving section to wrap up the entire phrase, this little pocket here at the end wasn't necessarily what I was expecting. And I found that that was pretty neat, to kind of subvert harmonic expectations by presenting something calm and almost alluring. There's a sort of like how metal has a general metally aggressiveness, that stereotypical metal kind of feels non-emotional to me. It just has a vague sense of aggression. Folk can kind of have that too, a general sense of peace throughout their music. Stereotypical folk progressions tend to heavily emphasize this sort of incredible palatableness and comfort. And that's what I get through most of this. And I think that's why it's interesting that we have so much of that, and then it diverts into this area of emotional intensity, looking at things that are less comforting, less inviting, less warm and soothing. It's an interesting movement there. I have no idea what all of this means, though. For a song called The Descent of Satan, I expected something possibly a bit more sinister, maybe something more like Comus. And that's not what we got here. We got a nice little like woodland folk track. And it's very comfortable to be within this sound. So let's figure out what they're singing about. All right. We have two characters here along Satan and Babylon. First stanza says that they're walking, talking of fire and ice, of the silence that stalks in the forests. It says that they're moving through a world ripped away from its center. They shear through the rushes, and all they do is want everything. They're rushing from the center and running from the inside. So I didn't know who long Satan and Babylon were, and apparently nobody really knows. But David did release in 2014 a book called Sing Omega, and revealed that they were supposed to be two trustful lieutenants of Satan in a novel about their descent to Earth. The center, then, I'm going to assume, is righteousness, its stability, its positivity, its love. To steer from that is to go towards greed, to go towards lust, to pretty much move in any of the cardinal sins, and to have a destruction of the spirit being the core of oneself. So it says that a world is ripped away from its center. It's begun to pursue otherworldly needs, wants, and that long Satan and Babylon are also rushing to this, running away from the center and wanting to get everything. There's a greed within them. That's pretty much the entirety of this song. Just talks about how they don't see pain. They just see things that they want. And they rush around trying to grab it while having conversations with each other. basically, I think, in a sense, to take this more metaphorically, this is probably a look at how sin has pervaded through the world, and this is a personification of that as it runs wild and rampant. At least that's my take on it. The very end of the song says, "Though the world makes dark shadows, you must look in your heart. In the dark, you must look in your heart." That's where you're going to find your light. It's where you're going to find your center. It's going to be where you find your defenses to battle the evil. That's this song, I think, and what it's aiming for. Pairing that back to the music, I'm not entirely sure. I think a lot of that, though, comes down to my biases too. Bringing in sort of a Christian angle on this. Pagan style folk music really isn't where I expect to hear these lyrical themes. I expect to hear them within something gospel adjacent. So it's an interesting combination for me, because typically something along these lines would be paired with some sort of reverence, larger than lifeness, some sort of epic or grand scale, with the chords being huge, not something grounded and rooted like this, despite the fact that that technically should make more sense, especially given the spirituality of it all. But it's just not the combination I'm used to hearing. And like I said, my biases kick in, and I don't really see too much of a match here, despite technically agreeing that these should work really well together. I wonder if this album, if they're going to continue in this direction, is going to, I don't know, help break down some of those stereotypes I have with musical sounds and lyrics. Now, we're going to go into the next track, which is called a sadness song. Absolutely bonkers. Assuming the song is anything like the title suggests, to put this after the previous track is interesting. Let's dive in. There is definitely a darkness in here. I'd say there is a sorrow component, but it doesn't feel incredibly sad.
And it falls away when we feel that we're born just to fall apart, and our mother lies in state, and the broken picture glistens, and the snow is at the windows, making neither sign nor symbol, and the earth covers earth, and the mud lies in.
There's warmth in here.
The sand stretch unbroken, and the dry wind bends
some sort of
and sighs, and the geese are running
They're like a recorder.
and our desires are running wild. Then we're
Definitely a woodwind, but it has a lot of the airiness that a flute would have.
rising from the incense, neither coming here nor going, neither heaven here nor hell, neither borning here nor birthing, neither dying here nor death.
There's a really interesting unification of the vocal harmonies where it's tough to distinguish the timbres of the two.
Inside our pain.
They transform into a third voice. It's wild.
And our eyes are blind with night, with our fingers clutching coins, and our thoughts burning with eye, and our eyes cannot be sated with the world and its nightmares, with the world and its dreams. dust, and the gods appear on the altars, and we recognize their face. It's a face that we have.
Yeah, once again, this is a really soothing
and
track.
It's full of fear and longing, and promises and threats, but they neither stoop to conquer, nor do they stoop to pray.
Was that a synth?
And the mines are void of diamonds that we carry in our rags. Then all the world seems a sadness song, a sadness song, a sadness song. And all the world seems a sadness song.
All right. Yeah, another very focused track. I have to wonder if the person who requested this mentioned it was dense, if they had meant the amount of music in it and not the music itself. There are 17 tracks on this, and there is a second album. The deluxe edition put a second CD in there with even more music. It's not like they added live performances or radio edits or something like that. From what I could see, it was all new stuff. Now, maybe it came off of older albums or something like that, but the titles themselves did not match up with CD1's titles. So yeah, this is, if you look at it from sheer length and track title, dense is definitely a way to describe it. But so far, 3 tracks in, and it's acoustic guitar music. Not a lot to add to this one in that regard. We have the guitar, gives us chords. I do like how there is melodic-ish elements. We're not just strumming chords. Sometimes we'll get the whole chord strummed, and then sometimes we'll build a melody out of playing individual notes of the chord itself. In particular, there's 2 or 3 lower notes in the chord that get strummed after the full chord has been strummed, and then you get these individual picked lines towards the end, right before we move into the next chord. It allows the song to not be entirely monotonous. There's certainly been some folk music in the past that we've listened to, particularly even when we checked out Country Music Week and we pulled in some older stuff. 1920s, 1930s American country music. And, it's a guy with a guitar and he's singing and the guitar is just strumming chords the whole time. Like, there's not a lot for me to add to that. That's not to diminish it as art or as music in any way, but for the purpose of analysis, what can I add to the conversation of chords? A chord and a melody is kind of tough to talk about at length, to dive into any sort of details or nuance within that. And so having these shifting melodies where, yes, we have a guitar playing chords on both tracks 2 and 3, and 1 actually, I think, that is a reductive way to talk about it. It isn't wrong, but it doesn't capture the whole picture, because what the guitar plays, especially when you look at particularly the right hand, it's very different from track to track, even though a lot of it is still the guitar just laying down harmonic information. Now, much like track 2, this one has additional instrumentation, but instead of having a woodwind and a triangle, we have a secondary vocalist and a recorder. I guess we still have a woodwind, don't we? We have a recorder this time around, though. And what I really like about the recorder is that it plays counterpoint to the vocal melody. I do think it is a cyclical idea. I think that the recorder's part ends up being an ostinato if you look large enough to see where the repeated phrase begins and ends. But for the most part, it feels linear-ish to me. And I really enjoy how this plays off the vocals, which are also a linear-ish ostinato. They both have elements that feel like they're continuously moving. They're not short one-bar loops, but they are loops on a larger scale. And listening to the two of these and the interplay, I thought was really nice. It creates something that, once again, feels very calming and soothing. There is a little bit of sorrow in this track, a little bit of sadness, but to me, it's not quite prevalent enough to call this a sad song. At no point in this did I feel that pull at the heartstrings. This is a track that fairly consistently felt comfortable and like a beautiful darkness. And I love all the moving parts in it. I'm curious what the themes are lyrically as we explore sadness in this track. Because when I listen to the recorder and both of the vocals all combined, yeah, there's a little bit of darkness in there, but it feels so inviting. It feels like this was a joy to perform. It doesn't feel like a downer track at all. And listening to these three instruments all come together, and especially having their differences, and I'll talk about that in a second with the vocal harmonies, it sounds like a really great conversation between all three parts. Not a downer, but something positive, something warm and inviting. Like, I don't know, sitting at, well, I mean, maybe even for some of you right here, if you enjoy the timbre and cadence of my speech, you might find my voice just nice to listen to, even if sometimes you zone out and aren't listening to exactly what I'm saying at all. But, you know, it could happen for anybody. Just that person that, you know, you could listen to them talk about anything, to talk about, you know, the science behind paint drying, and you would sit there and enjoy it just because of the cadence of their speech, because of the timbre of their voice. Something about it is just very soothing for you. And that's what I get with a lot of this. It just sounds very comfortable to be in this atmosphere with these instruments. The acousticness sounds great. After listening to, well, I mean, this week was a little bit of a reprieve, but you know, most of the time I'm listening to electric guitars, I'm listening to massive sounds, I'm listening to high volume music. Even when it feels quiet, it is still maxed out in volume. Thanks loudness wars of like the 70s or 80s. I don't remember when that happened, but you ruined contrast in music. It's just nice to return to these types of songs that are purely acoustic, that have dynamic volume, that has space in it. I can feel how the instruments themselves aren't filling every bit of the sound sphere. And when you pair that with just the very soothing, comfortable chords that they're playing and the beautiful melodies they're singing, it's nice to listen to. And that's not how I would normally describe something called a sadness song, but comforting and nice to listen to is how I would describe this. Now, coming to the vocals, I enjoyed the dual vocals here, and weirdly enough, their timbres are super close. I began to hear a little separation in the second time that the vocals came in, but that first time, it almost became a single new voice. It was kind of wild. But the second time introduced spatial distortion. And this was helping with me separating the two voices out, because occasionally the female vocalist would be just a hair bit ahead or a hair bit behind of the male vocalist. And this separated out their timbres enough for me to hear. But it also creates a separation in the melody. We now have a sort of delay or after image going on where you get the idea first and then a representation of it just a hair bit behind that. And it was never disruptive, but it certainly played into this multi-melodic factor to this section. because alongside this, we also have that recorder going off too. And while the two vocals are singing the same thing, them being temporarily out of phase creates another layer of counterpoint. Granted, I might be stretching definitions here a little bit, as the being out of phase only happens momentarily in specific sections, usually towards the end of a sentence. There was still probably 70% of this where they were completely locked in, but still, there is deviation to it, even if it's only a little bit. I just thought that was cool. It was done in a very tasteful way of creating this sort of temporal dissonance without, leaning into it and making it a thing. It's just another texture of the song. All right, lyrics. This track focuses on a bunch of things that would cause someone to feel sad, that happens every day in the world. We start off with more metaphorical ideas, like a broken pitcher glistening, snow on the window creating neither sign nor symbol, simply existing. But then we get into more specific things, as we're wrapped in our troubles and our pains. We're racked with fires with longing, and our eyes are blind with night. Our fingers clutching coins, and our thoughts burning with eye. And our eyes cannot be sated with the world and its nightmares and its dreams, though later they'll be filled with a small handful of dust. So we have the idea of being blinded. We have the idea of longing, wanting things we don't have. This leads really well to our eyes that cannot be sated. There's always something more that we want. We're never happy with what we have. It says the world is filled with nightmares and dreams, and that our thoughts are burning with I. And selfishness, only what concerns me, myself, and I. It says eventually the gods will appear on the altars and we will recognize their face. And it'll be full of fear and longing and promises and threats. Then all the world seems a sadness song. So he basically says there's a lot of terrible things going on in the world, and people are being terrible, and they're getting too distant from their cores, from their self, from their center, from their spirituality. And it makes the world a sad place. Now, one thing I did notice here, and I went back and read some of the other lyrics on the album so far, there's rhythmic patterns, but not rhyme schemes. And at times the rhythmic patterns can shift. I find that they fit within the music rather well, but when reading them, kind of seems random when we're going to shift from one idea to the next. In a lot of ways, if you just read the lyrics, it comes across as free poetry, which is really interesting because it does socket into rigid rhythmic devices within the music. The songs we've listened to do not change time signature. While we have listened to 4/4 tracks and 3/4 tracks, they are consistent for as long as the track exists. There's not really much in the way of syncopation. There's not much in the way of polyrhythms or polymeter. We don't have shifting time signatures. The songs are locked into a groove, and listening to the accent points on usually the guitar or maybe some sort of accompanying percussion like the triangle in track 2, locked into a rhythmic device as well, and the vocals sit within that. Despite the shifting length of lines that is showcased within the written word itself, it still fits within the rhythmic cadence of the music. This is very interesting, and something I think I'm going to be paying attention to a little bit in the next couple of songs to see how the words fit within the music in ways that, at least on paper, doesn't seem like it would make a lot of sense. Now, this next track is 5 minutes long, and the ones that follow it are 3 minutes each. I don't know how we're going to chop all this up. We'll see what goes into what kind of songs I have thoughts on, but if a lot of this album ends up being an acoustic guitar and a vocalist, we may end up chunking together a few tracks until I actually have something worthwhile to bring up, since at least instrumentally and on the blueprints of the composition, there really isn't a lot more I can say about these tracks, assuming we continue on with the trends that we've looked on with tracks 2 and 3. So let's dive into A Song for Douglas After He's Dead. I'm trying to place this. The beginning is an iconic melody, but even this section seems familiar to me, and I can't place the chordal progression.
He crouches on the floor, there's a mask on the wall, and he leaves through the pages of a book. Wait as he may in the shadow of other leaves, his heart in embraces to time's lost.
I love the violin part in the back. Yeah, I have heard this chord progression before, and it's right on the tip of my tongue.
The descent of life trees on his camouflage soul. The winter of memories carved powder white. Beyond his skull's form, the scorpion lies in the crunch of the snow. As his darkness increases, the twilight of ice encircles his teeth. Song for Douglas after he's dead. This is a song for Douglas. His Mercury dances.
Some tambourine. Now this does feel somber, but also in remembrance, almost as if it were to be played at a wake. I'd say rhythmically it's a little too upbeat for that, but harmonically it fits. We have some bells in here too. Yeah. Yeah, dude, I'd say marimba with yarn mallets. There's something fantastical about the vocals too. Yeah, I think that's my favorite track on the album so far, and it's no surprise that it's also the densest. I love the guitar opening, bringing in these melodic lines before the guitar ends up being relegated to rhythmic cadence. Dun, da, 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 dun, da, 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 dun, da, 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 dun, just strumming a chord on that. And I think the chord is even slightly muted because you get a lot of the, what's a good word to describe it? The percussive component of strumming strings through a lot of this track. It almost sounds like a washboard at times with just how clacky some of the string sounds are on the guitar strumming. But it was a phenomenal intro, and I think allowing that to bleed into the violin taking over the core melody in the background, yeah, the atmosphere on here is moody, it's dreary, but it also has a bit of a sea shanty element to it. I think part of that is the three mixed with that rhythm that I just sung out on the guitar. And the two of these create something that feels very, very wavy, very flowy. And when you mix that with the overall dreariness of it, I think that kind of gives it a sea shanty vibe, although it's almost too melancholic to really be described as that. As I mentioned, I think if we look at this purely harmonically, it feels like something to sing at a wake. It definitely has a feeling of loss deeply encoded into it, despite the rhythmic bounciness. It's almost too fluid to really lean into that sorrow, and I find this to be interesting because the song continues to kind of pull me in two directions. One of which is that I just really enjoy the cadence of all of this, but the other is that it does feel like it's supposed to represent sorrow and sadness a lot better than a sadness song did. And through that lens, I don't know if I should enjoy this with a smile on my face as if I'm in the corner of a tavern listening to these folks put on a catchy tune, or if I should begin to feel sorrowful for this person and whatever they're singing about. It feels harmonically in a very different area than rhythmically. It's a very interesting combination here that I don't think is wrong or bad in any way. It's just, once again, like the musical and thematic schism I felt on track 2, an interesting schism here that is built upon my understandings of these sounds based off of my experiences with them. Once again, more of my biases being challenged. I will say though, to wrap this section up, the vocals I mentioned being fantastical. I don't think that's the word that best describes it. It was the one I was feeling at the time, but there is a heightened element of them, which I think is probably more accurate than fantastical. And through that lens, I could probably say is a bit dramatic, maybe even in a theatric sense. There is almost an over enunciation of emotional components to it and a non-academic approach to vocal delivery. I'm not going to say that I assume David's the vocalist. I should probably look this up soon. But I'm not going to say that he can't sing or that he doesn't know how to sing more traditionally, but through the lens of this album so far, the tracks have definitely presented the vocalist in a unique way. The specific ways that certain words are, or even syllables are enunciated or even hung on to in ways it all presents something that feels overdone. If they were acting, I'd probably say they were overacting, which again is not a bad thing. Sometimes that can absolutely work. Jack Black and Jim Carrey definitely overact. They overstate everything they do, and it's phenomenal. Their works are phenomenal because of that. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, and I'm trying to figure out if it supports this or not. There are certainly elements, certainly passages in the album so far where I have been taken out of the experience because of the vocal delivery, as it ends up being a bit overdone and even at times a little eccentric, as I think we saw in what I believe was the chorus of this track. It is that line, "A song for Douglas after he's dead." It's very overdone, very dramatic, and it takes me out of the song. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I think that's up to subjectivity. But usually being taken out of the art and being reminded that I'm listening to music and not exploring this artwork is not my favorite way to experience something. And so my gut feeling right now is that it is overdone in a way the music isn't, and we do have a bit of a stylistic clash going on there. But it's possible that by the end of this album, or maybe even on subsequent listens to this album, if I come back to it, that I have a different opinion on it. But here we are, like 10, 11 minutes into this, and I do find it a bit distracting at times. It is a unique vocal delivery, that's for sure, but not one that I think is consistently supporting the art as a whole. This song just calls out someone named Douglas. That's about it. You don't really hear diss tracks too often outside of hip hop, but that's what this one is. It mentions that this Douglas guy, he crouches on the floor, he has a mask on the wall, that his heart embraces times long since scorched, so he's fixated on the past. It says that smoke goes through his hair and he's covered in patterns. Maybe he has a lot of tattoos. It says after he's dead, this is a song for him. And this is a song for him as his Mercury dances. It says there's a swastika in the palm of his hand and a crooked cross in his mind. That there's honor of violence on his lips. That his father waits for him near the towers of silence, where they worship fires so long ago quenched. I have no idea. This is just wild. So then I'm like wondering what this song is about. I find there's an annotation at the very bottom in the About section. It is hypothesized that this song is about Douglas P. from the band Death in June. He contributed as guitarist and songwriter to Current 93 in the late 80s and early 90s and would leave the group and supposedly sever ties with David after this album. So your guitarist and fellow songwriter leaves, and then you write a song about how he's not a great person. That's my best take on this. It says that his heart embraces times long since scorched. He has a swastika in the palm of his hand. What was another line? It says, and over some wall, if you look through the rubber amongst ruins of churches where life conquers death, though empires cannot last, where blood and soil's concepts have faltered and failed, a cloud still shows teeth as the world disappears. The idea of wanting a time that's gone, focusing on blood and soil as failed concepts, something that this Douglas guy still holds on to, which is Nazi terminology there. Looking at ruined churches, an empire that did not last. Did Current 93 have a neo-Nazi in their band for a decade, and then only after they left wrote a diss track about how they're a neo-Nazi? This This is mind-boggling to me. I think I'm just going to move on from here. This song is leaving a very strange imprint on my mind and is certainly coloring the album for me. I hope we don't come back to this, but it's very strange to do that. I don't. And in this kind of music too. I talked about how beautifully melancholic this track was. Little bits of sadness in it for sure, but generally comfortable to listen to. And then come to find out, this guy is just putting this other dude on full blast. But this is a dude who was in your band. He had a swastika tattooed, presumably, in the palm of his hand. Maybe this is also figuratively in the palm of his hand. Regardless, that means you knew who this guy was, and you still let him. I don't understand this. This is so confusing for me. The song itself is kind of wild, but then to put this information out there for the world to know... Someone give me more context on this, please. There's no way we went from the last couple of tracks to this. We just punched that accelerator full gas right now. Took the intensity from like a 5 to an 11. What in the world? All right, like I said, we have 2 short tracks coming up. Probably run them together. Let's kick it. Three. 1, 3. That 1 and 3 has been pretty consistent through the entire album and gives it this rooted feeling in a way that emphasizing 2 and 4 typically projects movement, momentum, forward placement.
Of the wood, in the closed forest,
yeah.
Christ appeared to me.
Very exaggerated vocals.
Several forms. 1, 2, 3, 4. Swastika, I'm told. On the cliffs of Moa, I.
Did he just say the word swastika again?
Behind the eyes of his innocence or guile, the young old man.
What am I listening to?
Of the brittle walls that held his son, pinioned. Mary walks on the cliffs, but not on waters. Then Christ appeared as wind. Mary runs down from the high walls. Christ appeared as flowers. Down long paths she walks. Christ appears at the rubble that holds the stones, that holds the paths, that holds the feet to the bones of the earth. Oh, if she waits, if she wakes, Christ manifests slowly as the dust on her eyes before she falls again into fields of sleep. I would like this anger to dissolve. And I wait for another revolution or revelation. It doesn't
Now we have an accent on every beat.
whether I see blood in wheels or
Feels like galloping. This is a lot of forward momentum.
but not to me. The skeleton of the universe, barbed wire of moons and stars remains unmoved. When the mother ocean covers me, I rush to drown with her breakers. All shall be well, she said, and all shall be well, but not for me, oh, not for me.
All right, another straightforward track there. Interesting production on the vocals, will split to the side but also filtered. That melody over there. I think there's some. Are the vocals in tune? I don't know if it's the shrill sound of the melody or the meandering of it. It's just not clicking for me. In fact, even our strings in the middle seem a bit too loud. I have nothing to add to track 5. Fairly straightforward song. Track 6, though. What in the world? To say that this is unusual? I don't think that would be too far from accurate. It's almost bordering on experimental folk, which I suppose is fine. You know, all music is art. I stand beside that statement. But I feel like there needs to be a lead up into this. Or at least, let me rephrase that. Need, I think, implies a better way to do it. I think I would have appreciated a lead up into this. 5 tracks of all fairly straightforward folk music, and then you toss in some experimental stuff. My ears aren't ready for it. My mind isn't ready for it, and I find it quite eclectic and off kilter. This melody over here does not belong in this song at all. I can't figure out what it's doing. The phrasing itself, even in isolation, doesn't seem to have any directionality or momentum. Ideas mold into other ideas, not fluidly, but randomly even. Not a single part of it makes any narrative or fluid sense to me. It just kind of seems to randomly do things that are at least in key with what the chords are playing, but as far as rhythmic cadence and pitch selection goes, I don't always understand it. It's like listening to someone in with a very thick accent. You're picking up, every third or fourth word maybe, and you're kind of piecing what they're saying together, but you're certainly not getting all of it. There's a lot that's just slipping right past your ear, and that's what happens here. Every once in a while, I'll hear an idea, and I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's more traditionally what someone would have done there. And then it's juxtaposed with so many ideas that just don't seem to connect in any way. And there at the end, the final 30 seconds or so, when they decided to end notes, when they decided to begin notes, they were just so imbalanced against the rhythmic cadence everywhere else. The melody wasn't matching anything else that was going. It was bizarre. I think that's a good word for it. Unexpected and unusual. Not bad, but certainly not standardized as far as folk melody goes. Really wild choice there. And it seems a bit distracting too, given its high-pitched component. It kind of pierces through everything, but it's not a big sound to begin with. You don't need to cut through the noise with something a bit sharper. So it just kind of is a sharp tone. It's not pleasant to listen to. And I think this kind of lines up with everything. I'll say the vocals were the best placed instrument here, but they're kind of quiet compared to everything else that's going on. The guitar pushed to the side rather than center is an interesting choice, but I guess it kind of balances out eventually once all the instruments come in. But the guitar is a little louder than I would like, and the strings in the center that come in around the midpoint are wider than I think they should be. And it creates another distracting element. It doesn't sound natural. And this ties into the vocal production as well. It is split and has a filter put onto it. And after listening to so many songs where the vocals are clearly recorded, something that feels natural, as if I could hear this just singing normally. This dude, no microphone, just stands in front of me and sings. And what I would hear in the studio version probably isn't too far off from that. This, though, is heavily modified. It is designed to sound unnatural. I was going to say inhuman, but I think there's still a lot of the human cadence and timbre in it. It's just mildly altered and then split in a way that I don't feel is necessarily balanced well. But it also feels like multiple takes. There's harmonic variation and rhythmic variation in it, which creates something that feels lacking singularity. And I had asked if the vocals were out of tune, and I think I came around to the fact that they're not necessarily out of tune together, they're out of tune together because they're not unified. They're out of tune with each other, not with the rest of the band. And it creates a lot of warble in the lead melody here. And that tension is just going to line up against everything else that's going on here that is a bit unstable too, whether that's rhythmic or production or harmonic. And it just creates a song that feels incredibly unstable in ways that consistently sound like they're so present in my listening experience of it that it's difficult to ignore them. And I never really had a chance to get into the song. I was always outside of it, observing it. Every time I felt like I was about to, okay, I'm okay with this. Let me just check out the song. I'm immediately brought out of it. Something else catches my attention. I never really got a chance to absorb the track as a whole because something was happening that reminded me, hey, dude, you're just in a room listening to some sounds on speakers, on headphones. So, I don't know. It's a bizarre track. It does a lot of obtuse things. And I think if the album had started out that way or had gradually moved towards more experimental tones, I wouldn't have come across this one so negatively. And knowing it's here, subsequent listens, I might be a little fonder of it. But it comes out of left field, dude. There's nothing to make me expect something like this. And it's just presented here with just as it is. I think it's gutsy. I'll give him that. It's a wild decision. I'm not going to say it's bad. I did not enjoy it subjectively. I don't like this kind of music to begin with. Y'all know I'm not a big fan of dissonant, semi-dissonant, experimental stuff. I prefer music that flows, that has direction, that tells a story. And this tells a story too, just not one that I can understand on a first listen. And to pocket that in an album that so far has felt pretty safe is wild. This could be a mid-ish, what are we, about a third of the way in? The first act is over, let's subvert expectations kind of idea. And those can be fun. Maybe the rest of this album ends up doing stuff like this, but if this ends up being a black sheep track where this is the only one that kind of does anything more experimental, it's going to be a little awkward in trying to understand that within the context of the rest of the album. Let me check out some lyrics for these two. In the Heart of the Woods, and what I've found there lyrically is about finding Christ in the heart of a wood. In a closed forest in the very center, it says, Christ appeared to me in several forms. 1, 2, 3, 4. A swastika, I'm told. This is unfortunate. I think, obviously, the imagery, the symbol of the swastika predates the Nazis' use for it and represents different things in different cultures and religions. But coming just off of the song for Douglas, it is quite unfortunate to bring it up so quickly with neo-Nazism in mind. Regardless, it says that through these cliffs, I thought they were in a wood, but it says, I walked with Mary, and behind the eyes of Jesus' innocence, the young old man talks of the brittle walls that held his son Piond. Mary walks on the cliffs, but not on waters. I don't know. It then says that Christ appeared as the wind, as flowers, as rubble, holding paths together, holding the feet to the bones of the earth. And Mary waited. And then Christ manifested slowly as the dust on her eyes before she falls again into fields of sleep. I would like this anger to dissolve. I don't understand that final line. The rest of it makes sense. At least from a metaphorical perspective, if you believe in the Christian religion, Christ is a part of God, and God built everything. God is in everything. So seeing Christ in a forest personified through everything that you see in the forest seems like a natural conclusion for one who is spiritual in Christianity. But the final line of wanting the anger to dissolve catches me off guard, as not a single bit of this feels angry. It says, I wait for another revolution or a revelation. It doesn't matter too much. Whether I see blood and wheels, all shall be well, she said. But not to me. The skeleton of the universe, barbed wire of bruised dead scars, remains unmoved. When the mother ocean covers me, I rush to drown in her breakers. All shall be well, she said, but not for me. It's a wild track, dude. The elements of finding Jesus in the forest, I get. That part seems like it makes sense to me, but pretty much everything that has to do with Mary doesn't. Also, he found Jesus in the woods. The young old man, I presume that's Jesus, talked about brittle walls that held his son. I believe this is probably from the perspective of the Christian trifecta. God, Jesus, and the Holy Ghost, all as one. So while speaking to Christ here, he's also speaking to God, and God is speaking of his son through his son. It gets muddy. Christianity already has this clarity problem with this specific concept, and it only gets worse here. This is a very strange way of wording all of this. I don't know. What does Mary know that our narrator doesn't? Why will everything be fine except for them? I don't know. I just... Mary waits in silence is about Mary waiting in silence. Yeah, this one says what it says on the tin. It talks about how she waits in the gap between his thought and his word. This gap of time seems to exist infinitely. It says, within this time, something is finished and something is born in this place where words cease when the moment is. Actions no longer matter, and while the sky may darken, she shall wait. Silver dust falls from her hair. She waits a span of time, and sketches of her life swirl around her silence silent. The sounds of her silence, the forms that they take, they cover me still. Words are finished, and I come swiftly and with a vengeance, and Mary waits in silence. So much of this feels poetic, especially if you take it from the spiritual angle. Both in Mary's relationship to, I presume, Jesus here, as the his thought is capitalized, but she is the mother of Jesus while also being a follower of Christianity. So this is both her child and her God. That's an interesting place to be in. And there's this respect or reverence she has while she waits between the thought being processed and the words being spoken. And in this place, she seems to be ready to receive whatever word is said. I think there's a beauty in finding this moment and expanding upon it and viewing it through this hyper stretched out lens, really magnifying, lensing down to this section and saying, well, what happens if we make 3 whole minutes out of this moment, waiting for an answer, not impatiently, but with reverence. But the final 2 stanzas throw me for a loop. The sounds of her silence take a form, and they cover me still. My fingers twist in pain, and I come swiftly and with a vengeance. Mary waits in silence. I'm sorry, once again, we have a track that is generally, I guess this one isn't palatable. This one's got a lot of noisy elements to it. Okay, so that angle doesn't work. But lyrically, at least up to this point, it is very cool, soothing even, gentle, an expansion of time and finding peace within that, resolve, patience. And the very last line is that I come with swiftly with vengeance. Why is there vengeance needed at all here? In fact, the I doesn't really show up much at all, except the very beginning. It says, I shall return no more. The sea covers me. It also says, I shall return no more imperium et nihil, which is Latin for empire and nothing. Imperium is an interesting thing, the concept of an empire showing up twice now in 2 songs back to back, also with, well, I guess not back to back. It was Douglas that brought up the empire, and now this one. While also bringing up swastika, neo-Nazis, all within this trilogy of tracks. It is quite bizarre for this terminology and imagery to continue to pop up. I'm becoming quite apprehensive about furthering into this album, as it's got this underbelly that I was not expecting. Not to mention, I did just notice the penultimate track is Hitler as Kalki, and I don't know what Kalki is, but that one's the 16-minute song, and now, all the swastika talks got me kind of skittish here. I don't know. This is a wild ride so far. There's a part of me that wonders if anyone's even going to end up seeing this video. I guess it depends on what kind of curves the album takes going forward, but it's setting up some shaky ground right here after the first third. The next track is called The Silence Song. Let's dive in. Once again, very soothing, warm. It's chill.
So much silence stretching above me,
A lot of sibilants going on in here.
around me too. Has it deafened me? Has it closed my ears? Has the silence itself brought about this rapture between silence and sound?
The cello's bringing in a little bit of melancholy to this that I didn't quite pick up on in the original guitar line.
If man raises one voice, I'll raise two then. One for loss, one for losing, one for death, and one for birth. I may hang bloody torn on this tree of moss.
Oh, there's a second guitar.
My grimace.
Chords and percussive sounds over on the side.
It's my grin. I rise triumphant. I'll rise triumphant.
There's a delay that goes on with the arpeggiation.
Won't catch me. I fly unseen through the wind of the world's missiles cut space, spearing the starlight, masking the moon, wide of the march. Give me 2 reasons to stay here. Lost light, lost love. Smudge the tracks and smother the traces of the fires of your fear. Near the, under the, beside the, beyond the flowers. Then further still, the children lie in silent space, wind shivers through their corn-burnt hair. Silence immaculate, if they move from silence to sound, will the world shudder? Will my heart stop in a cave, in her maze? The spring slides through my sadness and my winter. The stars have now frozen.
Noticing too, the vocals are more spoken word at times.
The stars have molten into space. The children wait. Flowers around burnish. Their hair is brazen gold and heart red rose. If I move, then I shall stop. How the sightless fallen, I shall take a knife to your heart. I'll take a knife to your heart. I'll take a knife to your
Okay, buddy.
heart. And London Bridge no longer remains. Christ's face refracted through the sky, then cuts up into different shapes.
It's interesting that this is one of their densest tracks with the most amount of layers and probably the highest amount of volume we've seen. It's the silent song.
odor of incense, and I double in pain, and I flick through the past as arrayed in my mind on a bed in a room that's locked on some hill. I'm gripping her hand as she cries to the wall. Stumble away and the pain dissipates. Suzanne's clad in blues with a mark in her hand. The lines round her lips are now scars in my mind. Down at the quayside, through the sun's rising mists, Suzanne drags me down. Run formless, the sky cancels its stars, then the fumes of the incense rise across the walls, and she watches me sideways like the world is on fire, between the beat of her heart and her gesture of fingers, the twist of her hands as it beckons through.
Something very eerie about this one. It might be the minimalism, it might be the staccato on the guitar.
For our lives to restart, and I wanted to tell her how all my heart's felt, but my words barb inside me.
It might be that swirly sound in the background.
As we sit in her room, to the sorrow I feel as I fall out of dreams, inexplicable sadness, this gash that I feel, devoid of her moon and ripped off my sun. If I knew at that joining, if I knew at that parting, if I knew at that second, if I knew at that moment the candle wax melts and the waters stop shining.
It's interesting too, as we get further into this album, I find more and more of the songs to not be as calming anymore. I think there is a soothing element to a track like this, but harmonically it's filled with tension. Not necessarily from the two chords present, but from everything else. An incredibly minimalistic track though. Bass, guitar, vocals, occasionally something in the background, but quite rare. Even that right there, maybe it's supposed to sound of clarity, calm, but it just kind of comes off as a little eerie. It's the brightness, it's the piercing through, it's the airiness of it. It is both physical and ethereal simultaneously. It's nice to return to a lead melody too. The past few tracks have been spoken word from the male vocalists. And another minimal track here. It goes well with Lament for Suzanne. It's a nice bit of contrast from the more dense tracks that we have started to check out here towards the middle of the album. I'd almost say there's a wistfulness in this track. All right. I figure that's a good chunk of music, and the next track is 9 minutes in length, the second longest. Of course, there's that 16-minute one later coming up. What can I say about these tracks? I mean, Lament for My Suzanne and Riverdeadbank are incredibly minimal. We have melody or spoken word often put on top of guitar arpeggiation, giving us our harmonic information, and then occasionally some sort of ornamental idea in the background. We did have a little bit of a melody on that second instrument there at the end of Riverdeadbank, and it gave us a nice soft counterpoint. I say that because it's a fairly short ostinato this time around rather than a lengthier repeating phrase. And so it's tough to really call it a melody rather than an ostinato or a short repeated loop. But it does provide something to counter the main melody here, and it does provide some nice physicality to the song that the vocals don't have. They're ethereal, they're otherworldly. They're very airy. And so it acts as a nice counter to that, presenting something that has a bit more rootedness to it and doesn't allow the song to just float away. But these two tracks are very much defined not by what they have, but by what they're lacking, particularly comparing them to a Silence song, which precedes both of them and is probably the densest track on the album so far. There are a lot of layers, most of them textural and harmonic. Lots of the instruments are there, not because of what they're playing, but because of the sound they have, the textures and the timbre of the instrument itself. That song comes across as dark, moody, eerie, even in places. There is an element of comfort in there. It's still generally acoustic instrumentation, and something about the warmth of these instruments always feels inviting, but harmonically, yeah, it's just not leaning in that direction anymore. I feel like we have drifted quite a bit from the opening track, and I wonder if I go back to that, if that's also going to have that same element of comfort. But when I say opening track, I don't mean the intro. I mean the first proper song. If I'm going to feel these darker undertones there that maybe I didn't when I was first introduced to this, but have picked up on gradually, or if that song did actually just have a lot of positivity to it, and the album has slowly spiraled downward into all of this negativity, which is interesting too, because the lyrics, for the most part, seem to paint positivity. It's about spirituality. It's about finding growth and rejecting the sins of the world, finding a way to turn everything right and to be a point of light and positivity within the world around you. And yet, most of these tracks tend to have a line or a stanza that subvert that and feel like it fits better within the doom and gloom that I'm slowly picking up underneath all of the comfort. Silent Song continues all of that, but it does so with many, many layers. For a track called a silence song, it is pretty much devoid of silence entirely. The songs that come after it absolutely feel more silence, more focusing on emptiness than a silence song does. This one is filled to the brim with sounds, and honestly, it's great. I love the way everything comes together. The strings, the woodwinds, the vocalists, all of them supporting each other, creating this dense atmosphere. It is something that I think lines up emotionally with pretty much everything else on the album. It is another doomy, gloomy track right here, but it's explored with multiple facets and tries to find counterpoint and ornamentation and harmonic complexity to view that. Most of the times we're looking at just 2 to 4 chords as we move throughout these tracks. We've gone quite a far away from track 2, which had that really interesting end to the phrase with the multitudes of emotions popping up there. We've kind of stuck with just general chord progressions as we've pushed further into the album. But the thing is when you add more and more instruments, you have multiple opportunities to add a note that isn't being played in your bass chord. You can modify what that chord is. If you only have 3 notes in there, throw a 4th. That's going to modify the emotionality of it. And I think that's the reason why Silent Song ends up feeling more emotionally complex and easier to connect to than the rest of the tracks, which unfortunately, juxtaposed to track 2, are drifting into a simpler side of writing. I do think it's an interesting mix of, again, comfort and sadness or doom or gloom, these sorts of weighty atmospheres. But maybe that's exactly what they're going for. The comfort of, I was going to say the comfort of dread, the comfort of nihilism, but that's the exact opposite of the lyrics. So I don't know. The more I listen to this, the more confused I am. I hear and read a lot of ideas between the lyrics and the music, the harmony, the melody, and the way it's all produced. And yet I find it difficult to come to terms with all of these ideas simultaneously. Too many of them are opposition to one another. There's too many clashing themes present for me to really find a cohesive whole anywhere in here. In fact, frequently I find that the music seems to run in opposition to the lyrical themes. Maybe that's by design, but even viewing them as purposefully showing the schism between the two, or maybe trying to showcase a 2 sides of the same coin, a sense of duality, I rarely see any purpose to that, anything that would uplift the art through this lens of friction. We're halfway through this album now, and I don't think that there's a single song yet. You know what? A song for Douglas after he's dead, it kind of fits. That was gloomy, and I said it was, fitting for well, even that though, that had the rhythmic elements that were more upbeat against the drearier harmonic elements. Yeah, there's always some sort of interesting clashing component to every single track. And either I'm missing something, which is quite possible. There's context that I'm missing out on. A lot of the lyrics There's every song has had a line or a stanza that I'm just kind of thrown off guard. Can't quite understand what it's doing there. It seems to be pushing in a very different direction than the rest of the lyrics. So maybe that's part of it too. Maybe I'm just missing some ideas, but musically, I think I have a pretty strong understanding of what's going on, particularly because so much of the music here is minimalistic. There's just not really a lot to grab onto there. It's pretty easy to pick up what they're laying down because they're laying down low density ideas, going for vibe over everything else. Let's hit some lyrics. Before we get into the lyrics, I did want to look up personnel list and instrumentation on this, and there are a lot. I'm going to assume that most of these are session musicians for individual tracks. There are 3 people who perform bass, 5, 6 people who do vocals. There's a couple of guitarists, a couple of percussionists. I'm going to assume that they all did them on different tracks, as none of these songs have really had the density for multiple percussionists or multiple guitarists on them, at least not in these numbers. But just to just call out a few here, we got David on vocals. It doesn't seem to do anything else. I kind of assumed that he would be a guitarist, like many folk musicians of the past. To play your chords and then sing over them seems pretty typical for this type of music, but David only does the vocals. Stephen Stapleton does guitar and vocals. James Mannix does percussion. Douglas P., the person talked about in track 4, a song for Douglas after he's dead, did percussion and guitar on this album, somewhere on it. Anyways, I wonder if he played guitar in the track dedicated to him that was sort of a takedown of him. Julie Wood does violin, tin whistle, clarinet, and recorder. Michael Cashmore is another guitarist. David Kenny is another guitarist. Edward Caspels did the bells. That rhymes. John Balance, we have additional vocals. Rose McDowell also on vocals. James Malandane Lafayette on the harp. Nick Salomon does dulcimer, as well as electric and acoustic guitars. Sarah Bradshaw on cello. Carl Blake as another bassist. Renee Birulf as vocals. Shirley Collins as vocals. It's very interesting. A lot of vocalists on this, a lot of different guitarists. I don't really feel too much difference in the guitar work, so I'm going to assume that there is still David just at the heart of everything compositionally, and we don't see too much of these individual artists injecting their style into the music. Maybe just one couldn't come around to record at a specific time, so got another guitarist. Maybe David wanted specific timbres of guitars, this person's specific guitar tone for a specific song. I'm not sure, but there's certainly a lot of musicians on here and a lot of instrumental redundancy. So I found that to be rather interesting and also something to look forward to, as I don't think we've heard harp or dulcimer on here at all, though I believe we have heard every other instrument that I listed. A silence song is not about silence, or at least not in the grand scheme of things. It is about standing up against silence. The beginning states, so much silence stretching above me, around me too. Has it deafened me? Has it closed my ears? Has the silence itself brought about this rapture? Between silence and sound, between the cry and the call, if man raises one voice, then I will raise two. This idea of standing up against something that you find shouldn't exist. He mentions that he'll rise triumphant, and you won't catch me. I will fly unseen through the wind of the worlds. Missiles cut space, spearing the starlight, masking the moon wide of the march. Give me 2 reasons to stay here. I will smudge the tracks and smother the traces of the fires of your fear. It is absolutely a resistance song against something that bewilders him, it distracts him, it wounds him. Silence here is a damaging element. The silence that can deafen. He says he'll stand up against that. The very end, he says, if I move, then I shall stop. How have the sightless fallen? I shall take a knife to your heart. This gets repeated 4 times. Says Christ's face refracted through the sky, then breaks up into different shapes. Now, aside from the violence of this, which honestly isn't that far out of place with the rest of the track, there's multiple cases about, right at the start, missiles cut space, spearing the starlight. We also have a concept of him having a grimace that will cut through his grin. So there's violence that is worked into this. But the concept here, I think, is that if the heart needs to be opened, if it is closed off and shut, a knife can do that. Not particularly the way I would go about saying this. It's a unique way of presenting it, but I think the violence is part of it too. In an odd sense, it's a forceful way to introduce an opening of people's hearts, to bring emotion back to a silent world. A cold world, maybe even. Like I said, not the way I probably would have done this if I was going to write a song about wanting to bring joy and positivity and connection back to a world that was seemingly dead and silent and cold. But I think that the message still gets across nonetheless, though I do think the violence undercuts it in a strange way that is going to make the message itself a little muddy in the water. A lament for my Suzanne is pretty much exactly that. The beginning of the song is a bit of a look back into the past, the memory of being at presumably Suzanne's deathbed and holding her hand, sitting there with her. It says, we're on a bed in a room that's locked on some hill. I'm gripping her hand as she cries to the wall. This all appears in his mind as an array of memories. The next stanza is fairly lengthy, and given by the lack of space in any of this, it is just a full block of words. I believe that in the lyrics, we didn't really have too many breaks here either. This was just one long section of the track. It basically goes through all of the pain that our narrator feels due to this person's passing. It says that she had a mark in her hands and lines around her lips that are now scars in my mind. Suzanne drags me down. All this world's in your mind, she says, but can salvation emerge from the heart of this dream? Where the horses run formless, the sky cancels its stars, and the fumes of the essence rise across the walls, and she watches me sideways like the world is on fire. The final moments of her life, and she seems to be disconnected from this world of sorts. Says she smiles through my pain and my loss yet to come. Says I wanted to tell her how all my heart's felt, but my words barb inside me and my lips cannot part. From the twisting of smoke as we sit in the room to the sorrow I feel as I fall out of dreams, inexplicable sadness, this gash that I feel, devoid of her moon and ripped of my suns. Just bearing the soul of how this moment tore our narrator apart. It says that sometimes he wakes up realizing that she's not with him anymore. Maybe he was dreaming of her. And he begins to start a couple of sentences, but ultimately doesn't get to finish it. He says, as she floats through my symbols and as I move to hold her, and that's the end of the line. Obviously, she isn't there anymore. He says, lament for my Suzanne, I wait for you still. Yeah, this is just a painful song right here. The emotional turmoil of losing a loved one. And dealing with that grief, that sorrow every single day. Of every little thing reminding you of them. Riverdeadbank seems to be a follow-up to this. If they're not supposed to be tied together, putting them in the track listing this way certainly ties their themes together. We have a narrator who feels lost, disconnected from everything around them. It says, like dust, I'm lost in the world. I thought I had a place between the heavens and the earth, between the starred sky. I feel the crunch of dirt, and I smell the scent of flowers, my aimless feet, to be in the world and not a part of it. That's the aim of the pain. I'm sorry that there seems to be no happiness in life. He talks about existing here. Sure, his feet are in the world, but he's not a part of it. He feels disconnected, separate from everything else. And through that, he finds that there's no happiness left in this world. It says, passing streams, dying dreams, there seems to be no joy. Just kind of continuing on with this idea that happiness, color, has left the world entirely. We're looking at someone who is probably clinically depressed at this point. And to pair this to A Lament for My Suzanne makes a lot of sense. The end of that track was about dealing with pain and grief, losing the one thing that meant the most to you in the world. This track is about feeling lost, entirely disconnected from life. It says, my feet are in this world, but they're not a part of it. It talks about the crunch of dirt beneath his feet. He's not connected to life anymore. Like the general metaphorical, figurative presence of life is always nature. In books, that when anytime they want to reference new birth, new life, they look at trees, blossoming flowers, the birds. It's always nature that represents this life. And here he is walking in these fields, but disconnected from what he walks on. Now, the end of this I'm a little confused about. He says there seems to be no joy. You can't see the ships sailing. You can't see the sails sailing, amassing as Christ on the horizon, outstretched. I've been trying to figure out what this means. What would the ships represent? Why would they be amassing on the horizon? What is the parallel to Christ supposed to represent here? How would the ships be outstretched? Or are they being paralleled, compared to Christ outstretching his arms on the horizon, some sort of larger than life, giant version of a god, much like maybe a Greek god would look being portrayed. It's an interesting imagery. I don't get it. This is another case where I have a pretty strong grasp on what a set of lyrics are doing up until the final moment. I'll be honest, I'm finding this a bit frustrating. Lyrics are already something that I feel like I struggle with way more often than the musical interpretations, and this album is making me feel like I get it, and then at the last moment, pulling the rug out, I'm tripping, falling on my face, and it's like, yeah, you didn't get it at all, bucko. And so that's kind of where I'm sitting with the lyrics right now. This, I think, is a really good case where, yeah, dude, this makes a lot of sense. Right up until the point that it doesn't, and then I'm lost. All right, moving into the next track, we have All the Stars Are Dead. Let's dive into this. See where we go in the back half of this album. All the Stars Are Dead Now. Looks like I did not have the full title there.
Bloody smoke endings.
So he started with like an old
There's a heart
70s game show kind of thing.
Old bony burren. There's a trick hole to her heart in soaring Snaple's nest, and the crack of the world, the moist muddy lips of her, the slit of the mother fallen, sliced from the stars by the slicing discus. But Camaroopa, Camaroopa, Camaroopa. From her mouth at the end.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the background vocals are saying Jesus killed Hitler.
Mouth at the ends of the times. The shapes that form the ends of the wheelings. The forces that shape the form of the breaths that cover the clouds of the green worlds. Last dancings flicker forth like spring.
There's some noise over here. The background vocals are shifting, but it's all sort of noise to the poem and the guitar, which I think are the core of what this track is exploring right now.
Mantra is smiling teethily at the stars. John sits on the stairs with me. His eyes are shining. Mother, come to me. Little lovely licking tongues of fire, smiling and slyly emerge from the stones. The air is now very, very viscous. In the distance, Sunday children play pipes. The air is now very violent. Birds do not fill the air. Laughing does not fill the air. No bodies fill the air. But the sun filters slowly through the air as if it's turned to sticky, sweet mud.
Yeah, we just have 2 chords. I mean, we're 3 minutes into this. Tension and release. I don't really get too much emotionality out of it. It's just a progression to sit underneath this.
Lilith is smiling with the corpse of a cow, and in that corpsey cow, the corpse of another, and so on and so on, and perhaps forever. If times were not folding and forming over each other, and so on and so on and so on, and certainly endless. Mene, mene, take all your fasting. We have been weighed and lost. We have been weighed and lost. I slept, I dreamt, I dreamed a dream. London, bright fires smiling and burning. Light roads rode through the star-lacked night. Many dark suns are falling, falling down. London Bridge is destroyed. In my mind, twigs and rubble gnaw in the dark heights and heart of Albion. Shudderings in the heart, cruelty in the heart, and this is over, all over now. In Camaroopa, in Camaroopa, my eyes, my mind, spinning, spinning back and forth, eyes in London, mind in a hole. Oh, they come, they run out, fleeing from what? They come out, running, running. Great Babylon has fallen, fallen, fallen. Jerusalem has fallen, fallen, fallen. The great, great beast is dead, 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 dead. Simon, Simon, dead, 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 dead. And some of are bleeding, children are smiling, but they're dead in the rubble. The dead, 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 dead. And Mercury rises and Mercury falls. And how dead, 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 dead are you? Summertime, when the living is easy.
Okay.
Summertime, when the dying is easy. The world shudders on, black tree against a bruised blue sky. Fairground is all shabby and silent. Red sky at night, red sky at night. Danger! Christ is crying. Christ's tears leaving his night and heart. All the many faces we have worn, all the many faces we have borne. And dead, 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 dead are we. Though once I thought, oh, once I read, the hidden God plays hide and seek, while others still run from him. From the world's stomach, the Goddies emerge. And who comes to judge us? And who comes to push us? The bloody master is bloody dead, dead, dead. And who comes to strike us? And who comes to hold us? Where is his colour? And where is her cover? And what is her nature? And where does he shine from? Broken birds move through the air. They all drink blood. When Christ smiles, his smile is broken. On the ivy, old dead trees, dead, dead, dead. Holly and ivy, dead, 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 dead. Rainbow, lovely art, lovely light, dead, 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 dead. Horn stag cross meets hunter, dead, 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 dead. Oh, Saint Eustace, ora pro nobis, old woman, old woman, old woman, oh, and dead, 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 dead. Now no summer's left this side of Boxwood. Cross is broken in my midsummer. The south is dying, the north is dying, the west is dying, the east is dying. There are four corners to the world, she said, and everyone is dead, 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 dead. Dead, 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 dead. Dead, 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 dead. And all the planets, they're dead, 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 dead. And all my heart, dead, 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 dead. Dead, 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 dead. Dead, it's all dead, dead, dead.
All right. Well, there's certainly been some tracks on this album that have given me this notion, but I think this track is the one that stands out the most. This work, as a whole, is unencumbered by restraint. Everything in it is incredibly personable and incredibly authentic. I don't think there is much in here wondering how it's going to sound to someone else. It almost seems as if David just wanted to create this music possibly for himself, and if someone else finds enjoyment in that, that's fine. But it isn't the core element of this album. And then there have been some tracks in here that I think are more palatable for a general audience. This is not one of them. The overabundance of simplicity, the use of noise, the clashing of ideas, the balance between all of the moving parts in here is not well balanced. The song is noisy to listen to. I think that we could have the non-musical elements, the shifting underlying choir part, and the guitar and vocals all done in a way, mixed in a way that creates harmonic balance, that places, not harmonic, production balance, that places them all throughout the sound sphere in a way that allows them to be represented in the mix of the song without stepping on each other's toes. That's not what we got here, though. This is cluttered. And maybe that's the point of it, but it also increases the barrier of entry. It creates friction for an average audience. And when we pair that with some of the vocal deliveries on this and the hyper focus on the almost poetic component to it, again, it's not really singing throughout this, it's spoken word, which is another, 9-minute spoken word poem with minimal music behind it and just 2 chords is not going to grab the attention of your average music listener. So again, I do feel that a lot of this is just authenticity. This is the voice of Current 93. If you enjoy it, that's cool. Awesome. If you don't enjoy it, that's also cool. It wasn't really made for you. I'm definitely in that camp where this was not made for me. 2 chords is not keeping my interest. Noise is not my favorite sound. The vocal delivery almost gets to a point of droning as there's not a lot of variety in the vocal delivery. And then we have an ostinato that functions as an ornamental idea. Halfway into the track, we get this one recorder part, and it is just the same 2-bar phrase over and over and over again. There was a point in this track when I honestly thought to myself, I'd honestly take a drone song over this. It has just enough things in it that I can't really zone out to it. There's too many moving parts, but it also is not anywhere near dynamic enough to keep me fully engaged. So I'm kind of left in this midpoint where I'm not intellectually challenged, but I'm not emotionally connected either. And I'm just here in limbo, musical limbo. I did not enjoy that, and I am quite afraid of the 16-minute track now, as this is what I would expect for a longer song. There is nothing on this album so far that has indicated that I'm going to get anything melodically challenging, that we're going to see any interesting types. Well, we did have some counterpoint on a couple of these tracks. Would have been nice to have that here. The ornamental ostinato kind of presented that, and I thought it was fine the first few times, but when I realized I was getting 5 minutes of this one phrase, that that drains my energy. And I hope that's not what we get on the 16-minute track, but it is probably what we're going to do. These songs are about setting an atmosphere of repetitive parts and allowing the vocal poetry to shine through, to give it a stage, a foundation to exist upon. 9-minute song, that's what we got. I assume we're going to get the same on the 16-minute song. And that's all I can say on this. The 2 chords don't say anything of interest. We literally just have rest and a little bit of tension so that we have directionality back to the rest. There's not a lot of emotional engagement in that. It is mostly just kind of soothing. It has that same home quality that a lot of the neo-folk sounds on the album have, but without the expanded emotional diversity of 4 or even 8 chord phrases. It's just 2. It's just incredibly minimalistic and then is just noisy on top of that. I knew I wasn't going to have a lot to say about this, but I did want to break for lyrics because I assume I'm going to be reading these lyrics for a few minutes. There's probably a lot of them. And I wanted to make sure we got this handled before we dove into the next string of shorter tracks. This song references an apocalypse. Now, part of that I got through the lyrics. But David also explained, and I don't know where this quote comes from, It is not listed here, so take this with a grain of salt. There's no source on this. It could be incorrect. But it says that this is the funeral lament of William Blake, who appeared to me in the starlight night and gave me this prophecy. May God have mercy on us all. Assuming I take this at face value, he has a prophecy of the end of the world delivered to him by William Blake, of all people, and then he believes it so thoroughly he must get the message out and chooses this song to do so, to describe the vision he had. That explains the authenticity of it. Beyond that, though, if I don't take it at face value, this is just an incredibly indulgent look at a bleak ending of this planet. And I do mean incredibly indulgent. Take this from someone who doesn't know how to be more concise about things. This is an incredibly verbose description of things. This probably could have been summed up in half of the length and still got to all of the main points. And I say that because there isn't pure repetition. We don't have a continuance of a phrase repeated throughout here. We don't have a chorus of sorts. It is all linear poetry, and yet the same ideas continue to be referenced and brought up. Some of it, I think, is for effect. The use of this is dead, 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 that is dead, 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 dead. It adds to the weight of all of this. It is repetition used for effect. But even I found it to be a bit pulpy by the end of it, overdone, incredibly dramatic to the point of losing its edge. Now, that's just my subjective take on it. I'm sure people can listen to this and have listened to it and are incredibly moved by the delivery of all of this, and the repetition probably plays a big part into that. But for me, it was too much. In the same way that Cryptopsy's None So Vile was too much, going over the edge and becoming almost comical instead of edgy. In this case, it doesn't feel as real anymore because it feels like it becomes a parody of itself by the end of the track. Although, again, subjectivity. It talks at the beginning, though, of a crack in the world. And something happens, stars are sliced by a slicing discus, and from her mouth is the end of worlds, the end of times, the end of breath. There will be no more laughing or peace or burning or sadness or joy. It says all flowers die, except for some few. A chain of burning bloody flowers follow my eyes crying tears. I love the vocabulary here. It says Lilith is smiling at the corpse of a cow, and that corpsey cow, the corpse of another, and so on and so on. I don't know what a corpsey cow is, but I get the gist that it is the corpse of a cow. It says that we have been weighed and we've lost. This idea of being judged at the end times and as a whole have been deemed unworthy of an afterlife. It says, great Babylon has fallen, Jerusalem has fallen, the great beast is dead, Simon is dead, there are bleeding children, but they smile as they're dead in the rubble. I'm not sure what the smiling is. That is a very peculiar description here. Again, though, I suppose I should take this at face value, that this is not a story he wants to tell, but feels he must because it is something he has seen. I'm skeptical of this, but still, I try to take this at face value. It talks about a world shuddering against the black tree that is against a bruised blue sky. In fact, it's a red sky at night. quickly changed pace on that. There's certainly passages, I'm skipping around quite a bit, otherwise we'd be here for, well, at least 10 minutes as I read these, because that's how long it took them to read straight through. But it almost reads as improvisation. There's many times when we will have 4 or 5 lines in a row, sort of all describing the same thing, but playing around with words or descriptions. We have quick, rapid changes like this. It was a bruised blue sky. Actually, it was a red sky at night. Christ is crying. Christ's tears are leaving his heart. All the many who have faces are now dead. The hidden gods play hide and seek. They come to judge us and to push us. The master is dead. They come to strike us and hold us. What is her nature? I assume this is the her from the beginning that came to bring this apocalypse. It just goes on and on about old women being dead. Rainbows are dead. The ivy is dead. The north, the south, the east, and the west, they're all dying. The 4 corners of the world are dead. The planets are dead. My heart is dead. The end of this song is just telling us everything that is dead within this vision. Now, again, for someone who believes this vision and is portraying it as they witnessed it, yeah, dude, if I believed this was how the world was ending, I'd be pretty anxious about this too, and maybe I'd focus on all the death that I saw as well. There is a theatricality to this that kind of represents the way the visions and prophecies are portrayed in media. A heightening of energy, fear, and anxiety towards the ends of the prophecy itself, and the stress that it puts on the seer. But again, it becomes very dramatic here at the end of the track, and the repetition leads it into, as I mentioned, to me, I read it as parody, even though I don't think that was the intention. It's still probably paired a little bit with the heavy repetition of the music, which was already draining me. I just wasn't engaged with this, and my lack of engagement was only expanded upon, or maybe it helped expand upon my lack of connection to the words. It's interesting. The divide between intention and reception. And that's exactly what I'm getting here. One of the largest divisions I think I have felt in any work. In fact, pairing it to Cryptopsy, that is easily the last time that I can remember bringing up this idea that what I'm getting from the music is probably very divorced from what the artist intended for the audience to feel while listening to it. And these are probably still this goes up there now, my top 2 examples for that experiential division and discrepancy. All right, next up we have Rosy Star Tears from Heaven, which is a title. It's rather short. We're probably going to run it into the track afterwards. Let's kick it.
There are broken birds scattered over the white cliffs of Dover. Once I read, and so I thought.
We haven't had a song in a... Okay. We haven't had a song in a while that splits the vocals out.
Then the white dragon rises from the north. I start to walk. My mind turns. Out of clouds, a smokish dragon rises from the west. Seems to me the world's dying. Smiling teeth and black dragon rising in the south. Rosy stars fall from heaven, turn to starry roses in greening grasses.
The schism between the lightness of the instrumentation, the flutes, very soft and gentle, and then the goblin voice. it's so absurd to me, but I think I'm still in that mindset from the previous track. I'm having difficulty taking this seriously, or as serious as I think it would like me to. One thing I really appreciate is, at least on this side, it sounds like it's all one take. So there was an S at the end of the sentence in the clean vocals and a start of a word with an S, and they just formed together there. And I appreciate that. It adds a little bit to the performance of all of this. And it's something I don't think about too often, because pretty much everyone uses audio workstations to kind of chop up songs into different takes and then combine them all into a perfect version of the song. I like this bouncy bass line. That lead melody in the background's nice too. I'm getting into this track. I dig this. Nice bit of syncopation on some of the guitar parts. Yeah, the vocal harmonies too. A little bit of the call and response where we get the male vocal and then the female comes in after. It's just two chords too. This is the end of the phrase. Phrase starts, still on this chord. Bring it up. Bring it back down. Okay, they're not going up to. Okay, that's very interesting. Just. The voice almost becoming crystalline there at the end. Yeah, dude, I enjoyed that. That was a fun little jam. That burn, 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 burn. It's just a nice bit of upbeat rhythm that we haven't really heard too much on the album. It's not to say that there has been zero syncopated ideas on this album. There certainly have been, but they are far and few between, with more often than not just kind of focusing on heavy accented beats, usually the 1 and the 3 frequently here, which kind of present this rooted groundedness, a stationary component to the album. And it's just nice to have something that deviates a little bit from the rigidity into something more flexible, at least rhythmically speaking. Harmonically though, this is one chord over and over. Sometimes we'll come up to something that introduces some more color, and then we come right back down to it though. That's the entirety of the song. We do have a little bit of chord shaping with the bass guitars. We're kind of bouncing between a few notes, which is nice. It adds a little bit more flavor to the chord that we're listening to. That's kind of about it. We got a nice ostinato that happens on an instrument in the back that gives us a nice bit of melody. But unlike some of the other tracks, we have melodic vocal passages here too. Rather than just having spoken word, the male vocals participate in singing here. And I think it works well when we pair that with the female vocalist as well, and we get the nice calm response, we get the harmonized part. There's a lot of cool complexity going on with this track regarding that. And the instrument in there is kind of giving us this other layer of counterpoint too. It is another song that to me just kind of feels very comfortable and inviting. It's very soft and serene. The instrument choice continues to be great for this style of music, and the chordal choices continue to reinforce this idea of, again, comfort, softness. It was a nice track, I think, to put after the previous two, especially the monotony of All the Stars Are Dead Now. As for Rosy Star Tears from Heaven, I don't know why I can't read that. The first 3 words throw me for a loop for some reason. This was wild. As gentle as this song is, frequently having just a light guitar, some light drumming, and very light flute melody, we contrast that, usually those, 4 bars, 2 bars maybe, with the same amounts of bars with the goblin voice, the layered goblin voices. One's kind of like a false chord, gravelly, growly kind of thing. Then we have this higher pitched, nasally stuff that's over here, this goblin thing. And it is bonkers. Again, coming off of All the Stars Are Dead Now and sort of already being pushed past my, having my suspension of disbelief broken. And I am having a tough time engaging emotionally with the artwork. This was not a song to follow up that's going to bring me back in. In fact, When the May Rain Comes was doing a much better job at reining me back in and saying, okay, let's find some more connection here. Let's find some more common ground. But the harmonized, I should say texture layered, harsh vocals here, that's probably not the best word for them, but they're certainly not clean vocals. That was just absolutely absurd in a track that's so calm and beautiful. And, maybe that contrast there, that dichotomy is what they're aiming for. Maybe the lyrics will explore that a little bit, but I had such a difficult time taking it seriously. And I think having the music, you take out the vocals and you listen to the instrumentation, one, they're overshadowed in the mix. Anytime we had, I'm going to call them alternate vocal works, because we also had this airy, high-pitched stuff over here, which felt different than the clean singing that we've had that's been ethereal in the past. Something about that timbre was different too. And then the growling in the center and the goblin on the side. These, they're so much louder than everything else, but I wasn't prepared for them. This is the second time in this album that I've sort of been blindsided with these odd choices that take me out of the experience of listening to it. The music, though, is incredibly simple here. It's a chord progression and a beat, and then sometimes we'll have a flute to help embellish things, give us a nice melody at times. And then there's the goblin stack. So it's a song. It happened. This album's getting weird, though. I think that the first half was less wild with their choices. The beginning of this album, I mostly had contention with the lyrical side of things, which I had a tough time really connecting with, and we found some interesting themes on there, connecting several tracks. But here in the back half, I'm starting to have issues with the music, the presentation of everything. They're starting to do some wild stuff back here, which is fun. I'll give them. This is, at least for me, more entertaining than the straightforward folk stuff they were doing at the first half. But it's certainly more difficult for me to engage with it emotionally and to really take it on the level they want me to, and to engage with it on its own terms. It's just so far divorced from me and what I like to listen to, and where my biases sit, and they're only getting further and further away from me. And I'm beginning to reach a point where I don't have a strong bias or common ground with it. The beginning's pretty straightforward neo-folk. I can get along with that. You know, the first couple of songs, not great for analysis, but I was enjoying them. The further we get into the album, though, I find that I have just less in common with it. And it's interesting to see the album evolve this way, where technically on the surface, it doesn't really sound like they're doing much different, but they're certainly changing some things up. Again, it leads into really strong authenticity. This is a Current 93 album. I would never confuse this for anyone else. But, the double-edged sword makes it less palatable, makes it more difficult, I would say, to get an audience to connect with you. And that always comes with being more authentic. That's the whole idea behind selling out, isn't it? You traded off your own voice for something that'd be more palatable for the masses. Well, Current 93 is still well within their own voice here. Not to say that they've sold out or anything, just, trying to compare this concept of authenticity to something more common, I suppose, commonly spoken about in music circles. Lyrics. Interestingly, Rosy Star Tears from Heaven is cyclical. Not just that, there's a heavy amount of repetition in the lyrical side. This is quite a deviation from the generally linear approach to lyrics that we have seen throughout on this album. There's 4 stanzas. The second and fourth are chorus. They are completely identical. The first and the third are verses, and there is a little bit of variation in the clean vocal stuff, but what the snarling goblin says is the same both times through. It says, "Once I read, and so I thought. So I sat, and still I thought. I start to walk, and my mind turns. It seems to me the world is dying. In between this, the goblin states that a red dragon rises in the east and a white one from the north, a smokish dragon from the west, and smiling teeth of a black dragon rising in the south." This, I think, goes back to the prophecy, which mentioned that all 4 cardinal directions were dead. Here we have dragons waking up in all 4 directions. And we do have the line, "It seems to me the world is dying." Now, interestingly, the second time through, though, it says that it seems to me that people are smiling. It says this, though, that they're doing this despite the fact that the world is such a bind. I believe he's trying to point to the idea that people are oblivious to this destruction of the world. Dragons are rising and no one cares. The chorus talks about these rosy stars that fall from heaven, burnt, burning smiles, lover's token. I have no idea what that line means. It says, my mother sighs, my father lies, the moon is violent, violent and vaporous. This chorus doesn't really mean much to me at all. I don't get it. I've been trying to understand this through the lens of a seer, seeing the end of the world and realizing that no one cares for them or for their vision. But I'm not sure how it relates to that. And if it's going through a different lens, if it's approaching a completely different topic, why would we change topics in the middle of this song? Two things of note for When the Main Rain Comes. This is a cover, originally written by Johann Vester and performed by his group Sand. Unfortunately, this may explain why I enjoyed this track more so than the others. It's also the least neo-folky, probably the more traditionally folk. Folk actually has a lot of ties to country, and it was actually sort of a derogatory genre given by country folk to this genre of music, which was seen too poppy and mainstream. I mean, that's not the word they would have used then. But yeah, they wanted to separate the folk singers from the true country singers, even though both of them were mostly using blues scales and singing over acoustic guitar work. They were singing about stuff that country people didn't want to be associated with. It's a totally different brand of things from those city folk. So it's really interesting how some things never change. But anyways, this does feel more traditionally folk to me, very country-esque rather than neo-folk. When I say, okay, so I guess maybe folk means different things in different countries, regions, cultures. I'm particularly talking about American folk coming around from, about 100 years ago or so. Anyways, this song, the second thing of note is that there's a twist ending. It talks about the streets having grass growing on them, maybe through the cracks or something. The asphalt is glistening, but all that will be washed away as the May rain comes in. It says that the leaves are young. There's tiny flowers that grow in the ditch. There's a laughter of children who are jumping in the puddles. All of this when the May rain comes. It says it's the morning of the year, a rainy green smile after a long, gloomy, pale winter night. This all seems mostly positive, that the dust and the dirt on the streets will be cleaned away, people will be able to play in puddles, the trees and the bushes and flowers will be able to get their nutrients from... Do they get nutrients from water? I guess just sustenance, right? Probably like us. But then it says, when the May rain comes, all of this shall be washed away. So we took that line from the beginning about cleaning the streets of dirt, cleaning the windowsills, which I kind of skipped over, but it says that the rain is dripping from sill to sill and down to the ground. All of this is going to be cleaned. All this will be washed away. But here at the end, it talks about the flora getting their water. The kids playing in the puddles will also be washed away. And it's interesting because it pairs it into the themes of the previous two tracks. Apocalypse on the horizon. It's interesting. By itself, I think I'd be confused by that final line, but not within the context of the album, and certainly not within the context of everything on the album. As I have mentioned previously, many of these tracks have lyrics that I think line up until a certain point, usually in the final couple of lines, and then there is a twist. Maybe there's a line that doesn't make sense to me, maybe the tone shifts. It's confused me in the past, but here it makes sense. Only because of the previous couple of tracks, though. The wild turn, though. So much of this song is feel good until that final moment, and I'm curious if that's in the original, too. The original would be lacking the context, of course, of All the Stars Are Dead and Rosy Star Tears. So, what would they have meant by that in the original when Sand played this song? I don't know. It's interesting. You don't see covers too often in albums. Usually maybe a bonus track, maybe something on an EP or something. This is right here, and not really the middle, but the middle of the album. Absolutely bonkers. Next up, we have Thunder Perfect Mind Parts 1 and 2. Interesting time here. It's not a consistent tempo, but it's not a solo either, which is typically where free time would be used.
I am the first and the last. I am the honoured one and the scorned one.
Not a big fan of that drone off in the corner.
I am the whore and the holy one. I am the wife and the virgin. I am the mother and the daughter. I am the members of my mother.
This is an interesting... Yeah, there's an interesting phasery sound on the vocals at times.
I am she whose wedding is great.
It's tastefully used. I think the mix favors drier sounds, but it's still there nonetheless.
I am the midwife, and she who does not bear. I am the solace of my labour pains. I am the bride and the bridegroom. It is my husband.
I wonder what that part is playing in the background.
I am the mother of my father and the sister of my husband, and he is my offspring. I am the slave of him who prepared me. I am the ruler of my offspring. I am the staff of his power in youth. He is the rod of my old age. Whatever he will, as it is to me. I am the silence that is incomprehensible, and the idea whose remembrance is frequent. I am the voice whose sound is manifold, and the word whose appearance is multiple. For I am knowledge and ignorance. I am shame and boldness. I am shameless. I am ashamed. I am strength. And I am fear. I am
Almost feels like a spiritual meditation. The droning certainly leans into that, but there is the woodblock to sort of create a center to the vastness of the drone. All right. Thunder Perfect Mind exists in two parts. Obviously, I mean, part one and part two. One seems to be a mantra of some sort, is a hyper repetition of the phrase I am and then something. That's the entirety of that 5 minutes of I am lines. At least that's what it sounded like to me. Very minimal instrumentation underneath that. That leads us into the drone of part two. I think this one feels very meditative, very spiritually centering. We have the wood block that gives us something to kind of create a feeling of time while everything else is infinite, just exists. Just tones that start and then don't end and eventually fade out. I don't know what else I could add to those two. I will say, though, I'm real curious about the background vocals on part 1. Because I couldn't pick up most of it. And it's so quiet in the mix. I'm not going to assume anything I heard was accurate. But it was not rhythmically lining up or melodically lining up with anything else going on in the track, and what I think I heard wasn't lining up with anything that I was getting out of the main vocals and their mantra of assertion. So, two really interesting tracks here. Also, part 2 is an instrumental, wasn't it? That's our first one. Maybe our only one. It does make me wonder why it's not just one track, though. I don't see how putting the drone on its own separate 2-minute track that obviously is supposed to be listened to after the mantra of part 1 helps in any way. If you listen to part 1, you probably want the meditative element after that. It feels so much as a core of the experience. I don't see too many people jumping straight to the 2 minutes of drone and skipping the mantra. So that's very peculiar, and I'm curious. Again, it probably has nothing to do with listeners' expectations or experience. It's entirely from the mind of David. For whatever reason, he felt he needed to split these two, and I'm kind of curious as to why. Anyways, that was a very short analysis segment, but I think those are the two most minimal tracks on the album so far. There just isn't a lot to dive into here. Lyrics. Thunder Perfect Mind 1 is an excerpt from the beginning of Thunder Perfect Mind, a paradoxical Gnostic text found in the Nag Hammadi manuscripts. Most of this is just paradoxes. I am the first and the last, the honored one and the scorned one. I am the barren one and one of many sons. Towards the end it says, I am knowledge and ignorance, shame and boldness, shameless and ashamed, strength and fear. I am war. In the middle, though, it says, but he is the one who begot me before the time on a birthday, and he is my offspring in due time, and my power is from him. I am the staff of his power in his youth, and he is the rod of my old age, and whatever he wills happens to me. There is that spiritual element of serving the God, being of them and for them. Everything else, though, seems to be paradoxical. I did notice that a majority of this is from the perspective of femininity, though. We have the wife and the virgin, the mother and the daughter, the barren one who has many sons, she whose wedding is great and have not taken a husband. I am the midwife and she who does not bear. I am the solace of my labor pains. I am the bride and the bridegroom, and it is my husband who begot me. I am the mother of my father and the sister of my husband. It's very interesting. All of it's done from the female perspective. I don't know what to make of that, though. I don't know if it's something that should be read into. It's obviously not David's words, though he does ascribe to them or believe them or want to share them enough to take texts from a Gnostic poem and put it into this. Put it into his work. I don't know what to make of it. I could not find any source that details the spoken word bit that is quiet and in the background of this song. I checked random sites on the internet. So many lyric pages. I checked Bandcamp since Current 93 has an official Bandcamp. Nothing. The only lyrics I can find are what's clearly stated in the forefront of the vocals. That makes me even more curious about what's going on back there. If anyone has insight into this, maybe you heard some stuff, maybe you found some lyrics on the internet, let me know. I am totally down to checking out more of what's going on here, because I feel like I'm missing something, especially since the forefront lyrics are talking about paradoxes. I'm curious if there's something underneath that is paradoxical to this spiritual element that's sitting on the top of this track. And here we go to the big one, 16.5 minutes. Hitler as Kalki. No words are needed to introduce this. I'm so scared. A bit fragmented as a start, but it's got some beauty within, and I can see it evolving and developing into something really well done. So the electric guitar has a bit of a psychedelic edge to it. It's also the first time we've heard anything non-acoustic on the album, I believe. The harp is also a first time for the album. It's got that wah on it though. Yeah, it's dancing around the Phrygian, never really committing. That's... yeah, influenced by Spanish guitar, not what I would have expected, given the Quasi-Phrygian starting. No cymbals either.
Maybe the hourglass of earth covering earth.
The bells are a nice addition.
Not in Jerusalem, not in Chorazin, not in Bethsaida.
What, a keyboard? Synthesizer of some sort, maybe?
We will not again see God humbled on an ass. blazing sword in burning hand.
Very interesting delivery of that line. Almost as if he forgot the line entirely.
Lo, I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. His hands are backed up, they're straining at his neck. What color shall we rank in him? What face shall we deliver him? There may be the black dog, there may be the white dog. Hitler comes as Kalki, Hitler comes as Kalki, Kalki comes as Hitler, Kalki comes as Hitler. But meaningless lights still hold our attention. I think that the holy books are written in blood and fire. But what if it's water? The fires turn to blood, the bloods turn to water, and the waters turn to what? Milk? Yes. Lies. Dust. Comes as Kalki. Kalki comes as Hitler. Everything becomes emptiness that goes through fire.
The call and response between the vocals and the violin. Of course,
Sangyun Chenmo.
as soon as I bring up the call and response, it ends.
Sangyab Chenmo. Hitler becomes Kalki. Kalki becomes Hitler. The white horse and red horse. Christ twists on the cross. Hitler smiles in the guttering rubble. He brings not peace, but a sword, and maybe the ocean roars immaculate, and maybe the stars fall incomprehensible. Oh, these all tell me, oh, these all spell to me.
As I feared, this was a cool start. Certainly staying too long, and we're only halfway done. I don't expect this changing too much.
Where's your God now?
Oh, the violin's back.
Point out his varied forms to you.
I'm gonna stop bringing up the violin because they get scared. As soon as I talk about them, they disappear.
He's nailed to the arms of
This is his nature.
But what makes the pain more real than their joy? Both are so mingled now and muddied together. To pull them apart, we butcher the essence and cripple its meaning. God is on the cross, or three gods perhaps. If they are all one, neither coming nor going, neither waning nor waxing, but immense in their unity. Matter and space. He rides between the spaces, and he rides between the pain. In the secret heart of becoming, in the secret modes of darkness, his eyes are now shuttered windows. Oh man, 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 man with his flaws and his lies. With
They're trying to make the listener nauseous. They're nailing it.
with his love
But the heavy
and
panning,
sorrow,
has it stopped now?
with his candle
I
of
think so.
hope
Good.
that stutters and dies. No liberation through hearing. When
That one guitar in the back just wailing.
Collapsing. Deafens, 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 deafens our ears and pierces our heart. Hitler as Kalki. Kalki as Hitler. Rolling and roaring. Swooping and soaring. Exultant and trembling. Sorrow, sorrow, sorrow. Where the eagle flies. Where the eagle shudders. Where the eagle draws. Where the eagle laments. All things merging, dissolving, then stars collapse. The vortex commences in space. The rubble collects. The debris gathers. Time starts to shiver. My heart's blood. If I dissolve into your body, if I hope to find like light in your soul, if together we fall into forever, would we not notice the turbulence that no longer waits? First he comes from on the hill, then he's running throughout the town, then he stands devoid of peace, devoid of place, devoid of pity. Oh, my dear Christ, carried broken from sad brown earth, teeth, teeth, is Kalki. Kalki is Hitler. Hitler is Kalki. Hitler is Kalki.
I don't think I would ever believe that wasn't a jam session. I suppose I can entertain the possibility that it isn't, that every single piece of that is hand placed in the sheet music, every single decision pre-composed. It's possible. That is not how it reads to me, though. There are 3 guitars, sometimes 4. There is an acoustic in the center that gives us the chords, primarily just the rhythm. It was the one we heard coming into the first spoken word section. We have the 2 electric guitars out to the side. We occasionally have a 4th electric guitar just wailing, noisy feedback, high pitch kind of stuff going on in the background. We've got the violin, and then of course the vocals. That's the primary makeup of this, and every single one of them is doing a lead element. I take that back, not the acoustic. That's definitely foundational there. It's presented pretty far in the mix though, like it was a lead instrument, and it ultimately puts so many instruments in one place. Now granted, we have the panning, we have range differences, all these things are going to help with placement, but as far as presence, they're all trying to be lead instruments, and it creates something that is very noisy, very cluttered. There are multiple times when the 2 guitars decided to ramp things up and overshadowed the main vocals, which may be intentional, but is a strange way to move the song without any exploration or proposed intention or anything like that. It just kind of happens. The vocals have been rather clear. I'm trying to follow the poem as best I can. And then out of nowhere, I can't understand the vocalist anymore. The guitars have tried to take over. There's also the rogue sounds that go on. There's wailing, high-pitched squealing stuff in the background that I was not a big fan of. Listening to the instruments individually, the violin is really the only one that participates in the song in any way. It has a call and response quite frequently with the vocals. The vocals will say a line, they'll stop for a couple of beats, and we'll get this violin ostinato. Then the vocals will do their line, and we'll get that same ostinato again. When I listen to the harmonic element, there's one chord. We have a slight elevation. I think we're primarily adding higher tones to the same chord. It changes our perception of the root though, since our lowest note I don't believe is anymore the same position that it has been, and so it sounds like we're changing modes at best, but ultimately if you listen to the 2 soloing guitars, they're not changing pitches at all. They're not moving anywhere. Their solos feel like they're stuck in place. So I assume the modal change is more of a harmonic movement more than a melodic one. It provides a little bit of change just so our ears don't get too tired, too fatigued of this one sound. But I would say overall, this is a 1-chord song. The 2 soloists, they're just... I hate to say this because I try my best not to be cynical about music and to try to absorb what I'm hearing and try to figure out what their intentions are, more so than oftentimes with something like this where I'm just not the intended audience at all, what I'm getting out of it. But I honestly don't get much out of the solo guitars. And I think a lot of this comes down to the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, this is just a jam session. I can entertain the idea that it isn't, but in my gut, this feels jammy. The two guitars are just never going anywhere. They tread the same ground over and over and over. There's no harmonic expansion, there's no emotional expansion, there's no story being told. They're just filling the space with palatable sounds. The riffs themselves, the melodies they play, the licks that they cycle into, they're not bad. We certainly don't have any harmonic clashing or dissonant tones, but they're just not saying much of anything. I don't want to necessarily call it fluff, because jam sessions as a whole kind of can fall into this element, and it's kind of the point of jamming, is just kind of get ideas out. Not every single one of them is going to be a 10 out of 10, but that doesn't mean any of it is worthless or pointless. And so I kind of want to avoid fluff, because I think that removes any sort of purpose from it. But besides filling the space, I don't get anything out of either of these guitar lines. They simply are. They embellish the harmonic information. They present that semi-Phrygian sound. The tones of the instruments certainly have a lot of reverb and wah and probably something else on them. It gives them that stereotypical psychedelic sound. I think that the hyperfixation on a single tempo, a single harmonic mode, a single chord, just all of this hyper-focus on singularity is supposed to create something meditative and trance-like, which the psychedelic sound pairs with very well. This was a big deal with psychedelic rock and kind of the whole psychedelic genre as a whole. But the song ultimately never really does anything. It's really interesting that as many layers as this has compared to other tracks, as many moving ideas as it has, as dense and layered as it is compared to some of the other songs we've listened to, it kind of sits in the same realm that most of them do, in that there is an atmosphere created that we will sit in for the entirety of a track to create a space for the vocals to lay their poetry down. And I don't hear this song any differently, despite having more moving parts. The additional elements that are here, the additional moving parts, aren't really saying much of anything. They're just here for the atmosphere. They're just doing it in more dexterous ways. And ultimately, this kind of comes around to the vocals as well. Something I had brought up in a previous section, I don't remember if it was the lyrical part or a musical analysis, is that sometimes the lyrics just, they feel like they repeat the same things over and over. I think this track landed on that, mixed with unusual, or I would even say stilted cadence, and what seemed to have been forgotten lines. Again, could all be pre-composed, could be part of the performance of all of this. But so often it felt like the vocalist was just saying whatever came to the top of their head. Very stream of consciousness style. The cadences were not always right. The number of syllables in a line sometimes would be, create a nice pattern and then deviate from it in obtuse ways to create a rhythmic friction against not just the patterns they've created, but the rest of the instrumentation as well. Some sections he just wouldn't say anything. Just have like two words, use that last word another time in the next phrase, and then carry on from there as if he's just biding time with filler, trying to figure out what needs to be said next. And I think that adds to the entire jam section element of it too. And there's something cool here. The fact that they can create this, presumably in real time. Maybe even the beginning of this track, the slow, disconnected, fragmented start is the literal beginning of the jam session. Just trying to figure out what people want to play, where, what fits, just kind of, easing into it. through that perspective, this is very cool. And I've talked about this in the past, that jam sessions just aren't for me, but I love participating in them. To me, jam sessions are usually for the musicians more so than the audience, but depending on who you're listening to and what kind of music you enjoy, you can absolutely find some jam sessions worth listening to. And they did write 16 minutes of music of consistently moving sections that generally had fluidity into each other, and 16 minutes of poetry here. All live, unscripted. That is a skill in and of itself. But I didn't enjoy myself here. This was a very, very long track for me. And every time I thought that we must be closing in on the end, we're only a quarter way in, we're only halfway in. There's still so much left to it. And then when you mix that with some of the less palatable ideas, the wailing guitar, the quick panning on the one guitar in the front, that was physically making me nauseous, which is a common response to rapidly fluctuating heavy panning. That's not something that's just specific to me. There's probably some sort of psychology or science behind why that affects people the way it does. But yeah, I found the back half of this to get more and more uncomfortable, to increase the discomfort in it. Not because of anything they were doing musically, but a lot of it came down to the production of it. A high-pitched drone in the back does not have to be piercing. A cool, bluesy lick of sitting on one tone and playing around with the pitch of it with bends and changing up the rhythmic elements of it. You don't have to pan that. You can do that lick and it works by itself. It's how it was presented to me that I found to be the most uncomfortable. And so ultimately it's a lack of variation, a lack of dynamics. It's interesting, again, as much as this track moves, it doesn't do anything. Completely linear melodies that never say anything other than what they said the first time they started playing. It's just an incredibly undynamic track here. Again, hyperfixating probably on some sort of meditative property to it all. But as loud and forward moving and linear and layered as this track is, it's everything I've been asking for. This is a classic monkey's paw wish. I've wanted more dynamics. I've wanted counterpoint. I've wanted more layers to it. And this song delivers on much of it, just in ways that I also don't find enjoyable. It's probably my least favorite track on the album so far. And, that spot's been picked twice now, I think. This album has certainly not been my cup of tea. And somehow here at the end, they've just found a way to one-up themselves again in elements that I'm not enjoying. So credit where credit's due. Admiration for the skill it takes to do something like this. I still think that, if you enjoy jammy types of music where you're not always going to get great stuff, but you're guaranteed to hear some really cool stuff and it's all done in the moment, they didn't fail at that. The poetry is, we're going to have to get through this. Oh my geez. I kind of want to do a running count on how often the word Hitler comes up in this track. But still, completely improvised poetry, that's something you don't get too often, even within jam sessions. So again, credit where credit is due. But I personally did not enjoy this one. This is wild. Absolutely wild. It talks of the last grains of the age. Once again, another apocalyptic song. It says it may be the hourglass of earth covering earth, but not in Bethlehem nor Jerusalem. It says, but on a white horse he comes, burning sword in burning hand. I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. There may be a black dog, there may be a white dog. Hitler comes as Kalki. Kalki comes as Hitler. There is this he. He comes ready to destroy worlds. And by the middle of this track, says that he lies matted half in time and half in space. I see him crossing the mountain range. It says, is this reality? What makes pain more real than joy? Both are so mingled and muddied now that we can't pull them apart. It talks about the confusion of existence here. Another stanza for, there's a lot of stanzas here. I'm going to be jumping around a lot. Another stanza for it talks about man with claws and lies, trying to bring peace and pain together simultaneously, trying to merge love and sorrow. But that despite all of this, the end of the world comes. This he, rolling and roaring, swooping and soaring, bringing sorrow everywhere. Everywhere that the eagle can fly. All things are merging and dissolving. The stars collapse. The vortex commences in space. Rubble collects. Debris gathers. Time itself starts to shiver. Says, if I dissolve into your body, if I can hope to find a white light in your soul, then together we might fall into forever. Would we not notice the turbulence that no longer waits? This is talking about a spiritual continuance after the end of the world. When time exists no longer, we no longer feel the turbulence of it. Can we be in that state forever? Now, here's where things get absolutely bonkers. This Hitler becomes Kalki thing. Kalki is the final avatar of the Hindu god Vishnu. In this song, it is alluded to that Kalki comes down to earth in the form of Hitler in order to kill Jesus Christ. All of that writing of someone who comes to kill, riding on a horse with a flaming sword, talking about being the destroyer of worlds. It is the god Vishnu in the avatar of Kalki, portrayed as Adolf Hitler, killing Christ. At one point it says, "Where is your God now? I'll point out his varied forms to you. In one, he hangs on the end of a tree. In two, he's nailed to the arms of this self-same tree. In three, he spins and soars and laughs through space." Speaking about the Holy Ghost, Jesus Christ crucified on the cross, and God soaring through heaven or whatever, the ghost form of him, some sky god you can't see. It's really interesting because of all the religious connotations here. This has the most cynical take on the Christian religion at large. Granted, it is supposedly said through the mouth of Vishnu Kalknu Hitler, but it's also written by David. I find that really interesting to kind of put himself in the mind of someone so clearly opposed to Christ, to the religion in its entirety. I have no idea what is going on here. I have one extra bit of context here, though. Apparently the song is an allusion to the philosophy of the Indian esoteric Hitlerist, first time I've ever read this word in my life, Savitri Devi Mukherjee, who believed that Adolf Hitler was the physical embodiment of Kalki appearing on Earth to destroy the enemies of the divine cause. I don't know what to say about this. On the one hand, it seems that the lyrics are fairly anti-Hitler. There has been a general spiritual and religiousness throughout the album that's been fairly positive about this and has spoke, well, I think generally positive about Jesus the couple of times that he's shown up on the album specifically, but we also have the very first track, The Descent of Long Satan in Babylon, two of Satan's, I don't know, they were like leaders in his army. I don't remember the term. And them sowing death and destruction and talking about the sin of greed in the opening track. And there seemed to be some negativity, some animosity put towards them. And that mixed with many of the other religious lines and symbolism across the album makes me think that if not David, then at least his voice through the album. Again, you know, it gets kind of difficult to separate art and artist. Some cases you probably don't want to do that, but in some cases you do. It is fine to make art that is exploring the darker elements of humanity. And just because you do make a song about, I don't know, let's go back to Cryptopsy, murdering someone, doesn't mean that you yourself are a murderer or want to bring harm to other people. The same is true for drawings, paintings, dance, all sorts of things. Art is an exploration of the human experience, and humanity can be kind of dark at times. So I don't ever want to say that what is being said in a song is the thoughts, opinions, or beliefs of the lyricist. But I'm assuming that the general themes of this album is that Christianity is good, or at least in the baseline, religion is good, even though we have primarily explored the Christian religion. Here, though, we have a song about Hitler killing Christ. I have to assume then that Hitler would be denounced here, that this is a bad song, that our narrator does not want this to happen because they love Christ. But then also I have to come at it from another angle. I have never heard of Indian esoteric Hitlerist Savitri Devi Mukherjee. This is probably because I don't frequent places where I would find out who Hitlerists are and what kind of philosophies they might have. This seems like the kind of person and information you would know if you're interested in Nazism, if you're interested in Hitler. And I guess that doesn't make you a bad person for being interested in this topic or this person. But when you pair that with a lot of the swastika imagery and talk throughout here, the association with this Douglas P. person, and it just starts to add up in really weird ways. I'm also pretty sure that Thunder Perfect Mind won one of the background lyrics, which it said something about, I heard the word Hitler. I got to go back and listen to that again because, you know, it's been out of my mind for a while. We got away from the swastika and Hitler talk for a few songs, but now Hitler is Cocky has me revisiting things. What was being said there? And I just, there is so much foggy murkiness in this album. I don't know if I would call it a National Socialist album. I think that this song in particular, the perspective I read on it is anti-Nazi, but it's, oh dude, there's so many like weird connections in here and an odd fascination with this kind of stuff. And it just murkies it up. I have to question things now. And that's not a good thing. Your stance on Nazism should be very clear. And when I say your, I mean like a general everyone. This is not one of those things where you can kind of straddle the line and walk the fence. You kind of have to have a strong opinion on it, one way or another. And it's not clear here. And that's not a good take for me to have listening to someone's music. I gotta figure out, I'll be right back. All right, it gets fairly clear at the end. The main vocal leaves and doesn't say anything for a while. We get two semi-clear lines from the background vocal. One of them, though, says, Hitler appears in our golden... And then the lead vocal comes in. The best I can hear is Dominion or Communion, something along those lines. I have no context for it, though. The rest of the sentences don't really help me understand what this is supposed to mean. But again, it's another song that references Hitler. What? There's technically one track left. It is split into two here on Spotify, but from what I've seen, the last track is a hidden track on the album. I don't know if I'm going to have a lot more to say about this. We'll probably listen to it. I'll wrap up some thoughts and then we'll do lyrics. So I guess I'm going to present this here. If you have any additional context on this, across the board, I'm always all ears for stuff. I'm listening to this for my first time. I don't know anything about David Tibet or Current 93. I have no background information. Anything that you can tell me is going to help me understand this more and maybe even appreciate it more. But specifically, the topic of Nazis, swastikas, Hitler, why does this stuff continue to appear on this album? And why isn't there a very clear statement made about it? I mean, I guess on the one hand, when did this come out? That might be some extra information here that might help. Let's see. 1992. Maybe at the time, you didn't really need to say if Nazis are bad or not. I wasn't that old, so I'm not really sure. I think we had neo-Nazis in the 90s, though. Well, actually, here's another thing, too. Where is David from? I'm kind of taking this from a U.S. perspective, but I don't think he has a U.S. accent. There's a lot of accents over here, but definitely does not sound U.S. though. We certainly had neo-Nazis in the States in the 90s, though. Yeah, I just can't think of any point in time where, at least over here in the States, not specifically stating your stance on Nazis was a good idea. This album blows my mind. Am I listening to a Nazi album? I don't know. 70% of it doesn't reference it at all, but the other 30%, like, guilty by association now. You got a lot of this going on in the album. I don't know. The final track here, a sad sadness song to, be different from a sadness song that was track 3. And then an ending, which is the final 2 minutes. Let's kick it. Okay. This vaguely reminds me of, maybe it was Sadness Song. That high reverb with the shimmering sounds in the back, almost synth-like. I don't think it was Sadness Song, because Sadness Song didn't sound sad to me. And this definitely has some melancholy woven into it. Might be one of the most minimal tracks on the album, with just the synth in the background, the acoustic guitar, and the vocals. No percussion even on this one. It certainly creates something that feels melancholic and isolating. It's interesting, as many female vocalists as we've had on this album, all of them have had a wide reverb and airy delivery, creating a very ethereal sound, whereas David's vocals are always physical and directed. I wonder if there's a meaning to that, or if it's just the dichotomy he wanted, that schism between the physical and the ethereal. All right. So this would be like the 20-second gap before the hidden track kicked in. I wonder how long the hidden track, how long the silence was on the actual CD. It was 20 seconds. That's not too bad. That doesn't make something super hidden.
14 long years she lies, oh. And love as she lies, she dreams in white stone. Colonnade marbled and balcony empty. A broken band brokenly marks broken time. 14 long years she dreams, oh. As dreamer she dreams on, as lover entwines. Her limbs grow round his limbs, she drinks from a bottle. She walks through the city, she's lost and then found. 14 long years further back scattered. She sits on some beach and reasons with him. In the secret red moist heart, the most loved and most dark. The flame shaft and fierce dart, the rose leaf and moss part. Spread-eagled like starfish, most pain and most fear. Like flower of seagrass, most fragile and harmless, most fiery and bloody, most childlike and wrinkled. This starfish, this spider, most wretched and great. Do not cry for me. Let me show you the path on which we neither come nor go. She smiles at me lake-wide, wet brown-eyed and dark-skinned. Some dark moon unmoved stalks through her loss. Do not spend this night with me. I shall make the fallen blind see. This too another broken toy, from broken girl gift to broken boy. I ask my sea blue rushing mother, shall she hear the lion's roar?
All right, I'm curious why that's a hidden track. It's literally called an ending, and it's clearly intended to wrap up the album. It's not like some bonus track that was just tacked on to the end. You know, we wrote it, but it doesn't fit in there, so toss it in there as a hidden track. No, that feels like the way it's supposed to end. Anyways, not much to add here. Sad Sadness song, as I had mentioned, very straightforward, quite minimal. You have your arpeggiating chord on the guitar, lots of reverb there. It is injected with melancholy and just a generally dreary track. We have a synth going on in the background and then the ethereal vocals on top of all of that. As with everything on this, and pretty indicative of folk in general, lots of ostinatos, lots of loops. The vocal melody is the same thing over and over. The guitar arpeggiation is the same thing over and over. It does a great job of setting the mood, and the vocals seem to fit within that. We'll explore the lyrics in a second to see how that works. And ending. It's a spoken word poem. The music is even relegated to pure background, despite the fact that we have some sort of recorder or whistle going on there. It's compressed down, quiet, shoved into the background. The music has momentum and movement to it, but it's not as important as the poetry in this case, which I think is really interesting. You know, for being only 2 minutes long, sounds like it has one of the more melodically driven compositions in the track, and it's de-emphasized. That's an interesting statement to make. To finally write something that, at least subjectively, I would want to listen to, and you've made it more difficult to listen to than chordal movements or drone, short ostinatos. Again, monkey's paw wish. I want more linear melodies, and the second time he's given me one, it's in a non-traditional form. It's almost comical. I don't get any sort of rest, though. The music is bouncy, fun, lively even, but the vocals feel defeated. And that's an interesting contrast there. It makes me wonder if the compression on the instrumentation isn't designed to create a feeling of distance, where the vocals are very far removed from that bright sound. The energy and liveliness of it are not something that's close to the vocals. We might even be able to see it as a sense of creating a sonic metaphor for memory, much in the same way that dream sequences visually have a waviness or maybe even a vignetting around the outsides of it to indicate this is definitely a dream. This might be a way of auditorially indicating the memory element of it. Regardless, there is that schism. Whatever they're trying to say with it, whatever they meant by it, there's a very big difference between the energy and emotion I get out of the vocals and what the music tells me. Okay, this is kind of clever. So earlier I had talked about a sadness song not really seeming too sad. The lyrics certainly brought some melancholy to the table, but musically, just kind of the same comfortable folk that we had already explored in track 2. This is a sadness song, but it's a sad sadness song. Not that the song itself is sad and sadness, but that it's a sad version of the sadness song. The lyrics here are identical, talking about the negativity in the world, and the final lines once again being when all the world, then all the world seems a sadness song. If all of this negativity is what you see around you, the world seems pretty sad then. Not a single line is changed, a single word. It is the lyrics from Sadness Song, word for word, but actually put into an atmosphere of sadness, which I think makes sense given what we've talked about with the lyrics so far. But I want to hold on to that thought for a moment and check out the lyrics to an ending first before I dive into what I think this album is. Well, I don't know what it's trying to do, but we're going to get there in a second. An ending is about, honestly, I think it's about moving on. It talks about 14 long years that she lies. She lies in her dreams of white stone, colonnade marbled, and balcony that's empty. Later on, it says 14 long years, and further back scattered, she sits on some beach and reasons with him. This idea of 14 long years of dreams and lying reminds me of a lament for my Suzanne. Someone who was ill and was slightly disconnected from reality and mostly lied and dreamt. These phrases haven't popped up a lot in this album, but they are shared in these two tracks. It talks about wild ideas, limbs growing around other limbs, broken bands brokenly marking broken time. We'll see later on this gets reused. A broken toy from broken girl gifted to broken boy. It mentions sitting on this beach though, and in the secret red moist heart, the most loved and most dark, the flame shaft and fierce darts, the rose leaf and moss part, spread eagled like starfish, most pain and most fear, like flower of seagrass, most fragile and harmless, most fiery of bloody, most childlike and wrinkled, this starfish, this spider, most wretched and great, do not cry for me, let me show you the path. I don't know what any of this means. It feels figurative, speaking about something that is of two forms. It is fiery and bloody, but fragile and harmless, childlike and wrinkled. Both starfish and spider. That one seems a bit of a stretch for me, but I do understand the more than four-legged sea creature versus land creature. But we are talking about opposing ideas, maybe even at times paradoxical. Keep that in mind. It says she smiles at me. Some dark moon unmoved stalks through our loss. Do not spend this night with me. So I ask my sea blue rushing mother, shall she hear the lions roar? And it's almost as if here we are communing with nature, asking about something else, maybe even someone else. This may be what led to the memory in A Lament for My Suzanne of sitting by her bed in her final moments, spending that time with her. There's a lot in this track I don't get. Figurative language that goes over my head, but I do see some patterns. I do see a message, and I think it is someone trying to figure out what to do next at the end of a really long journey, a 14-year-long journey. That is a lot of time to get complacent in patterns, in ritual, in traditions. what happens after you have gotten in and settled into 14 years of comfort when that comfort is removed. How do you rebuild from there? That's what I get out of this track. And I ask myself, what does this have to do with everything else? Obviously, a Lament for my Suzanne is where I immediately draw parallels, but that's not what all of this album has been about. There's generally been sorrow throughout here, but this idea of moving on from pain is not a consistent theme. And I start looking at other things. I look at destruction as a theme throughout this apocalypse, rain coming down. Remember, we looked at When the May Rain Comes, and what seemed like a song about rebirth and cleansing ended up being about destruction. We have songs in here about moving on from past friendships, possibly. We have songs about reconciling with religion, spirituality, and your placement within that. There's a few songs in here that I cannot place within this larger view, but I continue to come back to Thunder Perfect Mind 1. The lyrics here from the Gnostic texts of Paradox. That we are multitudes. We are not just one thing. We are, in a writing term, not two-dimensional characters. We have depth to us. We have contradictions. We are humans. We have flaws. It is difficult to, within just a few words, describe who we are. And pretty much every way you describe someone, you also have to add a caveat, for we aren't robots. We aren't machines. We will deviate from any description of who we are sometime in our life. This album ends up feeling paradoxical to me. It is both hyper-focused on rebirth. It's focused on moving on and healing, while also focusing on the apocalypse of death, destruction, pain, sorrow, negativity. It's not filled with grief, but it is filled with fear and anxiety. But also trying to find ways to take steps forward, to move on from this, to better prepare for the future. I wouldn't necessarily say it's an album about learning, making mistakes and learning from them, but it's certainly one about the paradoxes of humanity and the ways that we can kind of do two things, destroy and create simultaneously. I'm not going to say that I think this was incredibly effective at that, but if I needed to pull some sort of messaging out of the wildly eclectic series of lyrics that we've heard in this album, and the eclectic combination of sounds across acoustic instruments, electric instruments, noise, very traditional modern folk sounds, all sorts of things going on here, performative poetry and singing. It's a lot of stuff all at once. I don't think it is an entirely cohesive album, but it does feel incredibly human given all of its flaws and imperfections. These are my thoughts then on Current 93's, what is this album called? Thunder Perfect Mind. What did you think of this, though? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Do you have your own take, perspective, or opinion on this? Let me know. Put all of that, as well as anything else you'd like to add, any additional information you'd like to give me, any answers to questions I've posed today. Put all that into the comment section below if you wouldn't mind. Above that, in the description box, link to Linktree. Y'all know how it works. Patreon, My Music, special selections, Discord, lots of stuff in there. Above that, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. UTC. As usual for Sundays, at least, we're going to do a 2-hour, probably 2.5-hour live stream. We do have 13 songs queued up for tomorrow. It's just, we listen to music, we converse about it. It's usually good talk too. It's not always all music. Light on the analysis, more on discovery and fun and enjoyment. So if that sounds like a good time, I highly suggest you join us. It's over at Twitch, twitch.tv/critical composer. A little different from Critical Reactions. Apparently that tag was already taken on Twitch, which I thought was a little rude. I don't take it personally, though. Yeah, that wraps it up. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.